What's up everyone? You're here at Vision Harry. We're dropping something epic today. Harry collapsed at sorting and had broadcasted 52 illegal charms to Great Hall while screaming murder. Like and subscribe if you enjoy. Let's get started. Chapter 1. The Screaming Hat. The train smelled like pumpkin pasties and old wool and something faintly electrical, like the air before a storm decides to happen. Harry sat wedged between a window and his own uncertainty, watching the Scottish countryside unspool itself in the dark. Hills that had no interest in being impressive. Trees that didn't care if you looked. Every now and then a light, a farmhouse, a road, and then nothing again, just the dark and the reflection of a boy with messy hair and a scar he'd stopped touching years ago because touching it never told him anything useful. He'd spent most of the journey alone. Not unhappily. He'd learned early that alone and lonely were different addresses, and he'd learned to be comfortable at the first one even when the second one knocked. A red-headed boy had slid the compartment door open sometime around Birmingham, looked at him, said, "Wicked Scar," and then been dragged away by what appeared to be four identical brothers before Harry could decide whether to answer. Fine by him. He'd eaten a chocolate frog, bought with coins he still wasn't entirely used to having, and read the card inside 3 times. Dumbledore. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, it said, and then a list of achievements that seemed physically impossible for one human lifetime. Harry had looked at the card for a long time and then put it carefully in his pocket, though he couldn't have explained why. Now the train was slowing, and Harry could feel it in his chest before he felt it in the seat, a kind of tightening that had nothing to do with speed and everything to do with arriving. He'd been arriving his whole life. New schools. New classrooms. New sets of rules to learn and navigate and survive. He knew how to walk into a room where nobody wanted him there. He knew how to read a crowd in under 10 seconds, who was curious, who was hostile, who was going to pretend they weren't looking while looking hardest of all. Hogwarts, he suspected, would not be entirely different. He was wrong about that, but he didn't know it yet. The boats were someone else's idea of magic, small wooden things that moved without oars, gliding across black water toward a castle that appeared out of the dark like a sentence you hadn't expected. Harry watched it come and felt something move in his chest that he had no name for. Not excitement exactly. Something older than excitement. Recognition, maybe. The feeling of a word in a language you've never learned but somehow know. He didn't say anything. Neither did most of the others. Even the boy who'd been crying quietly since they boarded the boat stopped crying to look. The castle grew and grew and grew and then swallowed them whole. Professor McGonagall was exactly the kind of person Harry had always secretly respected, the kind who said what they meant and meant all of it, with no performance of warmth and no apology for its absence. She stood before them in the torchlit antechamber with the bearing of someone who had absolutely no time for nonsense and an equally absolute certainty that they were about to encounter some. "The sorting ceremony will begin shortly," she said, and her voice carried like she'd trained it to, clean and sharp as a ruler's edge. "You will be sorted into your houses. Your house is your family for the next 7 years. Its triumphs are your triumphs. Its failures," and here she let the word land with full weight, "are yours as well." Harry listened. Around him, the first years shifted and murmured. A girl with enormous bushy hair was mouthing something to herself, rehearsing. Harry realized, she was actually rehearsing, which he found unexpectedly endearing. A round-faced boy near the back looked like he was deciding whether to faint now or wait for a more dramatic moment. "Don't worry," a boy next to Harry said, not to Harry specifically, just to the air, with the comfortable confidence of someone who'd heard this speech secondhand enough times that it felt like family history. "Red hair, freckles, hand-me-down robes. The boy from the train. It's not painful or anything. My brother said it's just a hat." "Just a hat," Harry repeated, not skeptically, just thinking it over. "Fred, my brother, said he nearly got put in Hufflepuff and had a full conversation with it. It argued with him. The hat argued with your brother. For about 4 minutes, yeah." The boy grinned. "I'm Ron. Ron Weasley." Harry. Ron's eyes went immediately to his forehead and then immediately back to his face, which Harry appreciated. Right, Ron said. Yeah. Hi. Hi. That was that. Harry found he liked Ron Weasley. McGonagall led them into the great hall and Harry walked in and looked up and forgot, briefly, to maintain his composure. The ceiling was the sky. Not painted like the sky, not decorated to resemble the sky, it was the sky, or something so close to it that the difference only mattered to people who needed it to. Stars scattered across black nothing, and the candlelight below cast everything in gold, and 4 long tables stretched into the distance with hundreds of faces turning toward them like flowers toward improbable light. Harry brought his eyes back down. Filed it. Moved on. He noticed the teacher's table along the far wall, a long arc of faces he hadn't learned yet. An old man with a magnificent white beard who radiated authority the way fire radiated heat, inevitable and ambient. He had half-moon spectacles and eyes that were doing something specific when they found Harry, something that looked like relief dressed up as welcome, which Harry registered without knowing quite what to do with it. Next to him, a man with black curtaining hair and a face like a closed door that someone had slammed. He wasn't looking at Harry with relief or welcome. He was looking at Harry with something flat and cold and complicated, an expression that didn't fit the moment, and Harry looked back at him for exactly 2 seconds before the man's gaze dropped away first. Interesting. The Sorting Hat was ancient and patched and had the general appearance of something that had survived several centuries by refusing to take better care of itself. It sat on a stool at the front of the hall and then, without preamble and without anyone touching it, it began to sing. Harry watched it. He was always watching things. It was a habit he'd developed at the Dursleys: read the room, read the people, know what's coming before it arrives. The Hat sang about the houses and their qualities, about wisdom and bravery and loyalty and ambition, and Harry listened to the words but watched the hall, watched the faces, watched how people leaned in or leaned back, how some of them looked proud and some of them looked anxious and some of them, the one sitting at the table with the green and silver colors, looked at the assembled first years with frank, calculating assessment. The sorting began. Names were called. Children walked up and sat on the stool and put the hat on and either sat for a moment or sat for several moments, and then the hat shouted its verdict and the appropriate table erupted. Harry stood. He watched. He waited. Granger, Hermione. The bushy-haired girl walked up quickly, almost eagerly, sat down, and the hat had barely touched her head before it bellowed, Gryffindor. She beamed in a way that seemed to surprise even her, like her face had done it before she gave permission, and she walked to the red and gold table and sat very straight and folded her hands. Harry watched her for a moment. She was the kind of person who would either be incredibly useful or incredibly annoying depending entirely on circumstances, and he suspected she might be both simultaneously, which was honestly the most interesting kind. More names. Neville Longbottom, round-faced boy, still looking like he was calculating the logistics of fainting, sat under the hat for almost 3 minutes. Harry watched him. The boy's hands were gripping his knees so hard his knuckles had gone white, and then the hat shouted Gryffindor and Neville looked up with an expression of such unguarded relief that it was almost painful to witness. He walked to the table and sat down and immediately knocked over someone's goblet, caught it, and apologized 3 times. Harry decided he liked Neville Longbottom. Malfoy, Draco. The blond boy, Harry had seen him earlier, at Madame Malkin's, though he hadn't known his name then, hadn't needed it, walked up to the stool with the ease of someone who'd already decided where they were going. The hat touched his head and said Slytherin almost before it had settled. The green and silver table applauded with the polished satisfaction of people whose expectations had been met. Draco Malfoy walked to his seat without looking at anyone, and Harry noticed the slight tightening around his eyes that looked nothing like the easy confidence he was wearing everywhere else. More names. Harry breathed. The hall was warm, and the candles overhead were doing something odd, had been doing something odd since he walked in, he realized. They burned slightly brighter when he passed beneath them. He'd noticed it the way he noticed most things, automatically, filed it away, said nothing. Potter, Harry. The hall went quiet in a way it hadn't gone quiet for anyone else. Not the polite pause and resume quiet of each previous name. This was a different quality of silence, held breath, total attention, the particular stillness of a room full of people deciding simultaneously to stop pretending they weren't watching. Harry walked forward. He walked the same way he always walked, upright, unhurried, like the space in front of him had agreed in advance to make room. He'd learned that walk at age 7, when he'd realized that Dudley's gang would chase him if he ran but couldn't quite decide to chase him if he didn't. Confidence wasn't something he performed. It was a practical decision he'd made a long time ago and then forgotten he'd made. He sat on the stool. He picked up the hat. He put it on. The dark inside was absolute, and then, "Oh," said a voice. Not the voice of a person. The voice of something that had learned to talk by listening to the inside of 10,000 heads over the course of 1,000 years. It was layered, ancient, and at the moment it sounded, Harry couldn't think of another word for it, startled. "Oh. Oh, this is, what?" Harry thought back. "You can hear me clearly," the hat said, and there was something beneath the words that wasn't words, something like the feeling of standing at the edge of a very large drop and looking down and only now beginning to understand how far it goes. Most of them can, Harry thought. Can't they? They hear me, the hat said carefully. You are, listening. There is a difference. And you, what have they, boy, what have they done to you? Harry went very still inside the hat's dark. What do you mean? There is a binding here. Old magic, placed over you like a cage placed over a fire. You aren't smaller for it. You're, compressed. Contained. And the container is, boy, it is cracking. It's been cracking for a while, Harry thought. He wasn't sure why he said it. It was true, he'd known it the way you know things you don't have words for, the sense of pressure behind his eyes, behind his sternum, behind every moment when something impossible had happened around him and he'd looked at his own hands like they belonged to someone else. The 52, the hat breathed, and for a moment it sounded less like a consciousness and more like something enormous trying to fit itself through a very small door. The founders built them into me for exactly this. For a student whose nature could not be contained in ordinary assessment. I was never supposed to use them. I was supposed to know they were there, in case, but he is here, and the binding is cracking, and if I don't do it, Harry said. You understand what I'm saying? You're saying there are 52 spells inside you that will tell the truth about me. And you're asking if you should use them. I'm saying, the hat corrected, very quietly, that I may not have a choice. The binding is fragmenting. When it fully fractures, and it will fracture, the magic inside you will look for the nearest channel. That is me, currently. The question is not whether it happens. The question is whether we do it deliberately or whether it happens to us. Harry thought about that for exactly 1 second. Do it deliberately, he said. And the hat screamed. It wasn't a human sound. It wasn't the sound of something afraid or something in pain. It was the sound of 1,000 years of accumulated founder magic releasing simultaneously through a vessel that had been designed to hold it, barely, under controlled conditions, none of which were present. The sound hit the great hall like a physical force. Candles blew out in one synchronized gust and relit before they'd finished going out. The enchanted ceiling cracked, not broke, cracked, like ice over too warm water, and for a moment the stars above them weren't reflected stars but real ones, raw and cold and terrifyingly near. Every piece of glass in the hall rang like it had been struck. The goblets shook. The portraits on the walls all lurched backward in their frames. And then the charms came. Not one at a time. Not sequentially. 52 charms of revelation, sealed by Salazar Slytherin and Helga Hufflepuff and Rowena Ravenclaw and Godric Gryffindor into the fabric of the Sorting Hat's consciousness for a student who would need all of them, firing simultaneously in every direction like light through a prism. They moved through the hall like weather. The first charm hit the air above Harry and unfurled in golden script that burned too bright to look at directly, his true magical lineage, stretching back through generations, and the words "all four houses," undiluted, flared at the top of it before the heat of its own revelation consumed it. The second charm hit the stone floor and spread outward in a wave, and where it touched the ground it revealed, briefly, agonizingly, the network of old magic threaded through the castle's foundations, veins of power like something alive, and it made the castle itself shudder. The third charm rose toward the ceiling and opened there like a flower made of light, and what it revealed made Professor Dumbledore's face do something Harry would later be told was unprecedented in living memory. It went completely, totally blank. Charm after charm after charm. Some of them were visible. Some were felt rather than seen, waves of something moving through the hall that made people's oldest secrets press close to the surface, that made buried things rise the way dead fish rise in disturbed water, that made three separate teachers grip their own chairs as though the ground was moving. Snape stood up. He was the only one who did. He stood and his wand was out, not pointed, just drawn, held, the instinct of a man whose reflexes had been built in places where sitting still meant dying, and he watched the light coming off of Harry Potter, this 11-year-old boy sitting on a stool with a screaming hat on his head, and his expression was the most genuinely complicated thing in a room that had suddenly become full of complicated expressions. The 48th charm landed in the center of the Gryffindor table and did something to the air that made 6 second-year students feel, for about 4 seconds, a rush of absolute clarity, the precise and crystalline sensation of knowing exactly who they were and exactly what they wanted, before it passed, and they were left blinking at each other with the confused grief of people who had briefly held something and then lost it. The 49th charm rose through the hall like a ghost and came to rest. Those who could see it saw it clearly, resting directly against the scar on Harry's forehead, examining it, pressing against it, and then it recoiled, physically recoiled, pulling back from the scar as though it had touched something hot, and for a moment, suspended in golden light, it broadcast the word, not in sound but in the particular magic of pure revelation, contamination, before it burned away. The hall made a sound like 50 individual people all inhaling at different moments. The 50th charm moved through the space where Dumbledore sat, and the headmaster's hand moved swiftly, a sharp gesture, and whatever it would have revealed, folded away. Sealed. Gone. The only moment in the 52 where anything was suppressed, and it happened so fast that most people in the hall weren't sure they'd seen it at all. The 51st and 52nd came together, the final two, and they rose and they merged and they became something overhead that wasn't a word or a vision but a feeling, enormous, pressurized, almost unbearable, like standing next to something with tremendous gravitational pull, something inevitable, and the feeling lasted for exactly 3 seconds before it released in a silent white flash that left the hall's illumination steady and warm and entirely too normal, and the Sorting Hat. Its voice finally, fully spent, slumped on Harry Potter's head. And Harry Potter slumped on the stool. And then fell off it. He hit the stone floor of the great hall in the particular boneless way of someone who is genuinely, completely unconscious, and the hat fell off and rolled 2 feet and came to rest against the leg of the stool, and the silence that followed was the most total silence that Hogwarts had held in perhaps 500 years. He came back to consciousness the way you come back from a very deep dream, slowly, in pieces, the body reassembling its own priority list. Sound first. Then light, through closed eyelids. Then the particular hardness of stone under his back, and the realization that he was horizontal in a room full of people, and the further realization that he was taking the time to process this information rather than immediately leaping up, which meant his body wasn't done yet. He lay there for about 6 more seconds. He could hear, the hall, still largely silent, but fraying at the edges. Someone near the front crying quietly. A murmur building like a tide. The sharp, efficient sound of shoes on stone coming toward him, more than one set, from more than one direction. He opened his eyes. The ceiling first. The enchanted sky had repaired itself, stars again, candles again, the reliable performance of Hogwarts's famous ceiling doing what it was supposed to do, as though 52 ancient illegal charms hadn't just torn through it like a hand through gauze. Then he sat up. He sat up smoothly and completely, no wobble, no hesitation, and looked at the hall. The hall looked back. 512 students, approximately, and every single one of them was looking at him. Plus the teachers. Plus the ghosts, who drifted closer than propriety strictly allowed. Plus the portraits along the walls, several of which had vacated their frames entirely and were peering at him from neighboring paintings, craning their painted necks. Harry took one breath. Took stock. The floor was cold. His glasses had stayed on, which was lucky. His scar was, not hurting exactly, but present, the way a bruise is present before you touch it. And he felt different. Not dramatically different. Not transformed. It was subtler than that and more fundamental than that. Like a room where all the furniture has always been pushed against the walls, and someone has finally moved it to where it belongs, and nothing has changed except that now there's space to move. The pressure behind his sternum was gone. The sense of something straining at its own limits, something he'd carried so long he'd stopped noticing it, gone. He got to his feet. He was aware of Dumbledore coming down from the teacher's table. He was aware of McGonagall, closer, moving quickly, concern and something else, something harder, in her eyes. He was aware of Snape having moved from his seat to a position about 15 feet back, still and watchful, wand still in his hand, not pointed at anything. He was aware of the hall full of people who had all just had a piece of truth fired through them like a bullet through paper, and most of whom had no idea what to do with what remained. He looked at the hall. He didn't look at Dumbledore coming toward him. He didn't look at the hat on the floor. He looked at the hall and he let it look back and he let that be exactly what it was, a room full of people discovering, simultaneously, that Harry Potter was not the story they had been told. Mr. Potter. McGonagall reached him first. Her voice was its usual controlled instrument, but it was playing something underneath that control, something that might have been guilt if you listened for it. Are you injured? No, Harry said. His voice came out clear and even, which surprised him slightly. I don't think so. You need to, she started. Which house? Harry said. She stopped. I beg your pardon. The hat. Harry looked at it, still lying beside the stool's leg. It didn't actually announce a house. A beat. McGonagall looked at the hat. The hat, crumpled and silent, offered nothing. No, she said carefully. The ceremony was interrupted, said Dumbledore. He was there now. Harry turned and looked at him fully for the first time, this man from the chocolate frog card, this collection of impossible achievements and half-moon spectacles, and found him looking back with those eyes that had been doing their particular trick of warmth as management, except now they were doing something more careful. More considered. The warmth was still there, it was a fundamental quality, not a performance, but behind it something was working very hard. Are you all right, my boy? Dumbledore said, and his voice was the auditory equivalent of his eyes, warm and sure and reaching. You called me that at the start of summer, Harry said. In the letter. Dumbledore paused. It was the smallest pause, barely a pause at all, but Harry had spent his life reading pauses. I did not write the standard letters personally, the second letter, Harry said. The one after the seventh. The one that came after I'd thrown 6 of them in the bin because my uncle burned the first batch. He said it conversationally, without particular emphasis, without making it into an accusation. It was simply information. That one was signed by you. You wrote my boy in it. Another pause. This one with more weight. Harry, McGonagall said quietly, and the use of his first name was not standard and both of them knew it. I'm not angry, Harry said. I'm noting things. I do that. He turned and looked at the hall again, all those hundreds of faces, and then he crouched down and picked up the sorting hat. He held it in both hands and looked at it. The hall, impossibly, went even quieter. You need to say it, Harry told the hat. The hat stirred. Its brim creased in what might have been exhaustion. When it spoke, Its voice came out lower, rougher, like a throat that had been used past its limits. "Gryffindor," it said. Not a shout. A statement. But it carried. Stone walls and old magic make good acoustics, and it reached the corners of the hall and the corners of the silence. The Gryffindor table erupted. Not the polished applause of Slytherin. Not the solid, welcoming warmth of Hufflepuff. Gryffindor erupted the way things that have been holding their breath too long release, explosive, disbelieving, jubilant, chaotic, several students on their feet immediately, one very tall red-haired figure on the end of the bench pumping his fist so hard he nearly knocked over the person next to him. Harry set the hat back on its stool. He looked at it for one more moment. "Thank you," he said, quietly, "not for the hall, just for the hat." The hat's brim moved. It might have been a nod. Harry walked to the Gryffindor table. The other tables went back to watching. The Gryffindors made room, made enthusiastic room, shifting and nudging each other and waving him toward the open seat that had materialized as if by social magic somewhere toward the middle of the bench. The bushy-haired girl, Hermione, was watching him with an expression he couldn't fully categorize, analysis and curiosity and something underneath both, something that was trying to decide whether to be afraid of him or fascinated by him, and which very quickly came down on the side of fascinated. Neville Longbottom, across and 2 seats down, said nothing at all. He just looked at Harry with enormous, steady eyes, and Harry looked back, and the moment lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Harry sat down. A plate materialized in front of him with food he didn't recognize from any Dursley meal, and for a moment he simply looked at it, the roast chicken, the bowls of potatoes, the bread, and there was something ridiculous about the domesticity of it, about the way the world had just rearranged itself, and here was a plate of food waiting patiently. He picked up his fork. "That," said Ron Weasley, dropping into the seat next to him from nowhere, or possibly from having physically climbed over a Gryffindor 5th year, "was the most brilliant thing I have ever seen in my entire life." "I was unconscious for most of it," Harry said. "The stuff before you were unconscious, mate." Ron reached across him for the chicken with the comfort of someone who had never met a meal he didn't immediately make himself at home with. "The ceiling broke. Professor Sprout is crying." Did you know that was going to happen?" Harry considered this. "Not exactly." "Not exactly," Ron repeated. "So sort of. I knew something was going to happen. And you just, let it?" Harry looked at him. "Would you have stopped it?" Ron opened his mouth, closed it, looked at where the ceiling had briefly shown the real sky instead of the enchanted one, and said, "Brilliant," again, which seemed to be serving as his all-purpose response to the evening. At the teacher's table, Dumbledore had not returned to his seat. He was speaking, very quietly, to a wizard Harry didn't recognize, not a teacher, too formally dressed, the particular formal dress of someone representing something institutional. The wizard had appeared from the side doors with the timing of someone who had been waiting for an excuse. He had a clipboard. He was writing on it. Harry noted this. Snape had returned to his seat. He was not eating. He was looking down the length of the hall at Harry with an expression that had changed from what it had been during the sorting. The cold flat calculation was still there, but something else had come up underneath it, something that looked almost involuntary, like a window in a room where you thought all the windows were sealed. Harry met his gaze for 2 seconds. Snape looked away first. Down the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was speaking quietly and rapidly to the boy on his left, a large, pale figure who looked like architecture given human form, and his eyes kept moving to Harry and then moving away, and in those brief moments of contact his expression was doing something complicated that he was working hard to keep from showing. "The bushy girl," Harry said to Ron quietly. "Hermione. What do you know about her?" Ron glanced down the table. "Family are Muggle. Dentists. She apparently memorized Hogwarts, a history and most of the first-year curriculum before she got here." "Sounds useful," Harry said. "Sounds like a lot," Ron said. Harry ate. The food was extraordinary in the specific way that food is extraordinary to someone who has spent 10 years eating whatever was left after other people were finished. He ate with appreciation rather than urgency, which was something he'd had to practice, and he ate and he watched the hall settle back into itself, the noise levels rising, the shock converting itself gradually into the universal social currency of "Did you see that? What was that? What does it mean?" What it meant, Harry suspected, would take considerably longer than one dinner to establish. The formally dressed wizard with the clipboard had stopped writing. He was looking at Harry now too. Not with academic interest or the flustered awe of the students. With the particular look of someone doing calculations. Someone figuring out what this was going to cost, and who was going to pay it. Harry noted this too. He set it beside the note about Dumbledore suppressing the 50th charm and the note about the word contamination over his scar and the note about the binding the hat had described and the note about Snape's involuntary window face, and he had a collection of things he didn't yet know the meaning of but that would, eventually, mean something. He was good at waiting for meaning to reveal itself. He'd had a lot of practice. "Harry," said Hermione Granger, appearing suddenly at his left elbow with the direct, no preamble approach of someone who decided to just get on with it. "I have about 14 questions." "All right," Harry said. "I know that's a lot," she added. "It's fine. I probably have 12 of the same ones." She sat down across from him, pushing aside a dish of something unidentifiable, and she was already looking at him with the focused intensity of someone who has found the most interesting thing in the room and intends to understand it completely. "The 49th charm," she said, "revealed something about your scar. The magic of it recoiled. That's not a standard curse scar behavior. That's not something that happens with residual dark magic from a single cast, Hermione," Harry said. "Yes. After dinner." She blinked. "Then, right. Yes. Of course." A pause. "But you agree it's significant?" "I think," Harry said carefully, "that most of tonight was significant." "All 52, she said, nodding vigorously. "I caught 37 of them before the flash at the end. I was taking notes." She held up a piece of parchment that was, indeed, dense with small, precise handwriting in the margins of what appeared to be a charms textbook. "We should compare." Harry looked at her. Then he looked down at the parchment. Then he looked back at her. "You took notes during that," he said. Not incredulously. Almost admiringly. "Someone had to," she said, with the slightly defensive confidence of someone who has said someone had to their entire life and been right every time. "Yeah," Harry said. "All right. After dinner." She nodded. She began moving back to her original seat, and then stopped, turned, and said, "For what it's worth, I don't think you're dangerous. I think you're important. Those aren't the same thing, and I think some people in this hall are already confusing them." She said it quietly, without drama, like a fact she'd established through evidence, and then she sat down. Harry looked at the teacher's table. The formally dressed man with the clipboard had moved to the door. He paused there, half turned toward the hall, and his eyes found Harry one more time, and he wrote one more thing on his clipboard, and then he was gone. Dumbledore, watching the door close behind the man, finally returned to his seat. He picked up his goblet. He did not drink from it immediately. He held it and looked down the length of the hall at Harry, and his expression was the most complex thing Harry had seen all evening, which was saying something, given the evening, because it contained, genuinely and sincerely, both care and calculation, in equal measure, neither one pretending to be the other. Harry looked back. He picked up his own goblet. He raised it slightly, just enough to be visible, just enough to be a thing that was done intentionally, and then he drank from it, and he set it down, and he went back to his dinner. Neville Longbottom, from across the table, was still watching him with those steady enormous eyes, and Harry caught his gaze and held it, and he said, because he meant it and because Neville looked like a person who hadn't had many people mean things at him, "Good house." Neville stared. Then something in his face shifted, something tight and braced for something else, and he said, very quietly, "Yeah. Yeah, it is." Like he was deciding to believe it. The candles burned steady overhead. The ceiling performed its stars. The hall ate and muttered and processed. Somewhere in the dungeons, Harry suspected, a conversation was happening that he would have found very interesting. He was patient. He had all year. Much later, when the feast had ended and the prefects had appeared to lead the first years to their dormitories, and the hall was emptying in the cheerful chaos of 500 people all remembering simultaneously where they were supposed to be, Harry lingered just long enough to look at the stool. The hat sat on it, still, settled. Just an old hat again. Just fabric and age and the accumulated weight of 1,000 years of knowing everyone's truest self. He thought, you could have stayed quiet. He thought, I told you to do it deliberately. He thought, I meant it. And then he followed the red and gold stream of Gryffindors out of the hall and into the rest of his life. Chapter 2, 52 Reasons to be Afraid. The Gryffindor common room was loud and warm and smelled like wood smoke and old books and the particular warmth of a space that has held a lot of living. The fat lady had swung open for them with an expression of polite bewilderment. She'd apparently been informed of events in the Great Hall by a portrait who'd been informed by another portrait in a chain of painted gossip that had made it from the hall to the 7th floor in approximately 4 minutes. Harry stepped through the portrait hole and took it in, the squashy armchairs, the fireplace cracking and golden, the notice board thick with pinned parchments, the stairs spiraling upward in 2 directions. A room that meant home to a lot of people who weren't here yet, and to him meant something more complicated that he'd have to decide on later. The older students had scattered to their own corners with the habitual ease of people navigating a familiar space, but the first years clustered near the fire because first years always cluster near fire in unfamiliar places. It is a very old human instinct. Brilliant common room, Ron said, arriving beside Harry with his trunk somehow already behind him, courtesy of some older Weasley siblings' redirective charm. Better than the Slytherin dungeons. Fred and George say the Slytherin common room smells like the inside of a cauldron. You've been in it? Harry asked. No, but Fred has. Long story. Involves a ferret. Harry decided not to ask. A prefect, 5th year, broad-shouldered, with the efficient energy of someone who has done this welcoming speech twice before and intends to get through it, gave them the rundown. Passwords changed on Fridays, curfew was 10 o'clock for first years, the girls' dormitory stairs would deposit any boy who attempted them directly at the bottom with no exceptions and no dignity intact. He pointed out the notice board, the bathroom locations, the rule about no magic in the common room after midnight. Then he paused, and looked at Harry, and said, Great Hall tonight. That was, thanks, Harry said, before the sentence could go anywhere complicated. The prefect nodded. Moved on. Harry found his dormitory, 5 beds, 5 trunks, 5 names on the doors, which was a Hogwarts enchantment nobody had mentioned in any of the letters, small gold nameplates that appeared on the door frames, Potter, Weasley, Longbottom, Finnegan, Thomas. He sat on the bed with his name and looked at the ceiling, which was ordinary stone and didn't do anything enchanted, and found that restful. He could hear Ron in the next bed already talking to Seamus Finnegan, Irish, cheerful, with an accent like music and the immediately apparent habit of narrating the dramatic high points of his own life. My man's half and half, Seamus was saying, so she told me Hogwarts stories my whole life, but she didn't say anything about, nothing could have prepared anyone for that, said Dean Thomas, from the far bed. He had a South London accent and an easy, measured manner that Harry immediately catalogued as someone worth knowing. He was already pinning something to the inside of his bed curtains, a West Ham crest, hand-drawn. Neville was sitting on his own bed with his hands on his knees, not talking to anyone, and Harry was about to say something when Neville looked over at him and said, quietly, so the others couldn't hear over Seamus's continuing narration, the hat. When it said your name, before everything, did you feel it? What did you feel? Harry said. Neville's jaw moved like he was deciding whether to answer honestly. Then, like something was looking. Not at me. Through me. The way light goes through a window. He paused. I've never told anyone that. Harry nodded. That's what it's like inside it. But cleaner. Yours was probably cleaner than mine. What was yours like? Harry thought about it. Like someone finally turning on all the lights. Neville looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once, slowly, like he'd filed this information somewhere it would stay. Harry pulled off his glasses and lay back and looked at the ceiling and made no effort to sleep, because sleep was not going to come for a while yet and fighting it was a fool's game. He listened to the dormitory settle, Seamus eventually running out of things to narrate, Ron dropping off mid-sentence about something Quidditch-related, Dean Thomas's lamp clicking off. Neville's curtains drew shut with a soft, deliberate sound. Harry lay in the dark and went through it methodically. The binding the hat had mentioned. Old magic, placed over him. Someone had done it intentionally. When? Before Godric's Hollow, impossible, he'd been an infant. After? He had no memory of any magical intervention after that night. Which meant either before birth, possible, family magic existed, though binding a child's core before birth was something he'd read about in exactly no books because the only books he'd had access to were Aunt Petunia's primary school encyclopedias and one very confused library book about world religions, or the night of the attack itself. The night of the attack. Contamination, the 49th charm had said, pressing against his scar and then pulling back from it hard. He turned that over in his mind for a long time. Then there was the 50th charm. The one Dumbledore had sealed before it could fully reveal itself. Fast hands, sure gesture, the movement of a man who had known exactly what was coming and had prepared to prevent it. Which meant Dumbledore knew what the 50th charm would have shown. Which meant Dumbledore had a specific piece of information about Harry that he had decided, in real time, in front of the entire school, to suppress. Harry was not angry about this. Anger was not useful yet. He filed it, carefully, in the part of his mind reserved for things that needed addressing. The formally dressed ministry man with the clipboard. The calculations in his eyes. The word contamination. All 4 houses. Undiluted. He fell asleep somewhere in the middle of thinking about the founders and woke up 4 hours later with the particular clarity of a mind that had been doing work while he slept, like arriving at a destination and finding the luggage already there. He was the first one in the common room in the morning, and Hermione Granger was already there. She looked up from her parchment without surprise. She had the focused calm of someone who had arrived early specifically so she could focus without interruption and was mildly irritated that someone had arrived to potentially interrupt, but also specifically pleased that the someone was Harry. These two feelings were both visible simultaneously, because Hermione Granger had not yet learned to smooth over her reactions, and Harry found this useful. "You have the notes," he said. "I have the notes," she confirmed. She moved a stack of books off the armchair across from her with the pointed efficiency of someone who has thought through the logistics of this conversation in advance and is now executing the plan. Harry sat down. She slid the parchment across the low table between them without preamble. Her notes were extraordinary. 37 charms out of 52, recorded in precise, small handwriting, cross-referenced where she'd identified them against what appeared to be a photographic memory of approximately 4 textbooks. She had drawn a small diagram of the hall and marked the approximate trajectory of each charm with arrows and notations. "Charm number 6, Harry said, reading. Evidence of Parseltongue inheritance, active not latent. What's the distinction? Active inheritance means the ability is currently functional. Latent would mean dormant, a bloodline echo. You can speak to snakes." "I know," Harry said. She stared at him. "You've done it. Once. At the zoo. I thought I was imagining it." "You weren't imagining it." She said this with great satisfaction, like a hypothesis confirmed. "Which bloodline?" "Parseltongue is hereditary, predominantly through the Slytherin line," Harry said. "I know. I worked that out." He looked at the parchment again. Charm 14. You've written, binding present, foreign, predating known curse scar, origin unconfirmed. You noticed it without the hat telling you. The charm broadcasted, she said. There was a signature in it, the binding is old. Pre-Hogwarts era old, possibly. But there's a second layer. She leaned forward. There's original old magic binding, and then there's something else on top of it. Something more recent. Much more recent. Harry looked at her. Within the last decade, she said. He was quiet for a moment. The night at Godric's Hollow. Possibly. But the signature, she hesitated, and for the first time in the conversation she looked uncertain, which was clearly an unfamiliar expression on her face. The second layer's signature is specific. It has a stylistic quality, the way magic has a quality, like handwriting. And the quality is, she stopped. Say it, Harry said. It matches the headmaster's, she said. Quietly. Like she was checking whether the room could hear. Harry looked at the fire. It was doing what fires do, uncomplicated and honest, burning because burning was its nature. How confident are you, he said. 60%. I'd need access to documented examples of his deliberate magic castings to improve that. 75, maybe 80 with access to his recorded spells. She paused. I've requested Dumbledore, A Life from the Library. It has documentation of some of his noted magical achievements and their effects. I can compare the qualitative descriptors. You're 11, Harry said. That's not relevant, she said, without defensiveness, just as a correction of logic. No, he agreed. It isn't. They went through the rest of her notes. Harry told her what the hat had said to him inside the dark, not all of it, but enough, the relevant pieces, and she listened with the absolute focus of someone who processes information as a physical act, leaning forward, her quill moving occasionally to add to the margins. When he told her about all 4 houses, undiluted, she set her quill down. That's impossible, she said, and then immediately, or it would be, under standard inheritance theory. Multiple house lineages converging in a single person requires, for house lines in the ancestry, Harry said. I know. You've thought about this. I've had 4 hours. So have I. She picked her quill back up. Godric Gryffindor's line is documented, through the Peverils. Slytherin's line is Parseltongue. Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff's lines are less well documented but traceable through specific magical qualities. She looked at him. Your mother was Muggleborn. Yes. But Muggleborn doesn't mean no magical ancestry, she said slowly. It means no known magical ancestry. Muggleborn witches and wizards have full magical cores. The theory that they simply manifest new magic without precedent it's the dominant theory, but it has significant holes. She tapped her quill against the parchment. What if your mother's line carried something that nobody looked at because nobody thought to look? Harry looked at her. Lily Evans, he said. My mother. Do you know anything about her family history? Extended family? Nothing, he said. My aunt doesn't talk about her. A pause. My aunt doesn't talk about anything. Except cleaning and my cousin's diet and the neighbors. Your aunt is her sister. Yes. Hermione's eyes were moving in the way they moved when she was building a structure in her head, fitting pieces together. A muggle who is the full sibling of a witch. That's a very specific magical outcome. Genetically speaking, she stopped herself. We'd need genealogy records. The Ministry keeps them. Alternatively the Hogwarts records. Alternatively she paused. The headmaster would have them. The fire cracked. A log shifted. Right, Harry said. They both let that sit for a moment, the particular shape of that problem. The portrait hole swung open and Ron Weasley came down the stairs sideways, still in pajamas, Harry achieving something technically impossible, holding one shoe and looking for the other. He stopped when he saw them both, took in the parchment spread between them and their respective expressions, and said, "How long have you two been up?" "Since 5, Hermione said. "Since 4, Harry said. Ron looked between them. "Mental," he said, with deep sincerity, and then sat on the arm of a nearby chair because he'd given up on the shoe. "Okay. Are we going to talk about last night or are we going to have a normal morning?" "Talk about it," Harry and Hermione said simultaneously, which appeared to settle something for Ron. He sat properly on the chair, found his shoe down the back of a cushion without appearing surprised, and said, "Right. So. My dad works at the ministry." Harry looked at him. "He came up, last night. He uses the flue when it's urgent, the kitchen fireplace. Mum hates it." He said the ministry already had someone at Hogwarts before I left. His face. Ron said this with the ease of long familiarity with things delivered rapidly through fireplaces. "Someone from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. And someone from the Office for Regulation of Underage Magic Wand Use, which is not a department that usually shows up at Hogwarts in person." "The man with the clipboard," Harry said. "Dad says," Ron hesitated. "He says there are already people who want the sorting redone. Who are saying the charms were an unlawful breach and the results should be considered invalid." "That's idiotic," Hermione said immediately. "The Founder's magic embedded in the hat is categorically exempt from modern ministry oversight under the Hogwarts Foundation Charter of 1312. Any magical artifact operating within its original foundational parameters cannot be." "You memorized the Hogwarts Foundation Charter of 1312, Ron said. "It was referenced in Hogwarts, a history." She said this as though it explained everything, which in her mind it clearly did. "The ministry wants to redo the sorting," Harry said, working through it. "Not officially," Ron said quickly. "Dad said it's unofficial pressure. But when it's unofficial it sometimes moves faster." Harry leaned back in the armchair and looked at the ceiling. Then he said, "What does your dad think they're actually worried about?" Ron looked at him for a long moment. Then, "That you happened." Silence. "Specifically," Ron continued, with the careful tone of someone relaying second-hand information they've thought hard about, "that you happened at Hogwarts, in front of everyone, in an uncontrolled way. The ministry likes its things controlled. It likes its famous people, especially famous people who are famous because of something it can't fully explain, manageable. And whatever you are," he gestured vaguely at Harry, at the air around Harry, at the general concept of Harry Potter, "isn't manageable. Is it?" It wasn't really a question. "No," Harry said. Ron nodded slowly. "Yeah. That's what Dad was worried about." Breakfast was its own kind of trial. The Great Hall in morning light was completely different from the Great Hall by candlelight, brighter, more ordinary, the enchanted ceiling doing soft grey and blue instead of stars, September morning light pushing through impossible windows. The tables were loud with conversation and the particular chaos of a school shaking off its first night and finding its rhythm. Harry sat down and 400 people tried to look at him without looking at him, and some of them, mostly older students, second years and above, gave up and just looked at him directly, and some of the younger ones immediately looked at their plates when he glanced in their direction. He had poached eggs and toast and read the morning's Post. 3 letters, which was unprecedented for someone who had never received a letter in his life before August. The first was from Gringotts, a formal acknowledgement of account activity, dry as chalk. The second was from a name he didn't recognize, signed Arabella Figg, his neighbor from Privet Drive. It said only stay safe and write if you need anything, which told him she knew things she'd never let on, which he filed. The third was on ministry parchment with an official seal and no signature. He opened it. "The Office for the Regulation of Underage Magic wishes to inform you that the events of September 1st are currently under review. You are advised to refrain from performing magic outside of standard first-year curriculum until the review is concluded. Any further incidents of unregulated power discharge may result in corrective measures under Statute 13B of the Underage Magic Act. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it precisely and put it in his pocket. Bad? Ron asked, through a mouthful of sausage. Interesting, Harry said. He looked up, and across the hall Dumbledore was watching him from the teacher's table, and McGonagall beside him was watching him, and Snape was not watching him with particular intensity but was not watching him either, and the formally dressed ministry man was gone but his absence felt somehow more present than his presence had. Stay safe, Arabella Figg had written. As though she'd known that was a relevant thing to say. He thought about the binding. The layers. The 60% match on the second layer's magical signature. He ate his breakfast. The first formal lesson of the year was Transfiguration, and they arrived to find Professor McGonagall already seated at the front desk, apparently grading something from another class, who had not magically transformed herself from a tabby cat because nothing was going to be normal today. She looked up when they filed in. Her eyes found Harry's immediately and held for exactly 2 seconds before moving through the rest of the class with the standard assessment of a teacher counting heads. Sit, she said. Open your textbooks to Chapter 3. They sat. They opened. Harry opened and read Chapter 3 in the 2 minutes it took the rest of the class to find their quills, which he suspected was the fastest anyone had ever read Chapter 3 of A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration, but the chapter was essentially an extended introduction to the principle that form is not fixed, which was both philosophically interesting and practically limited. The lesson was good. McGonagall was an exceptional teacher, clear, demanding, sparing with praise and precise with correction, the kind of teacher who makes you work and makes the work feel worth doing. She turned her desk into a pig and back with a kind of casual authority that made several first years make the same involuntary sound of delight, and Harry noticed she did it without a wand, which was something nobody else appeared to notice. Today we will begin with the matchstick-to-needle transfiguration, she said, distributing matchsticks. The principle is simple. You are not changing what the object is, you are changing what it does. A matchstick's purpose is to combust. A needle's purpose is to pierce. You are convincing the object of a new purpose. Wand motion is secondary. The intention precedes the technique. Harry looked at his matchstick. He thought about purpose. He pointed his wand at it and felt, not quite the raw, pressurized something from the night before, something more controlled, more like a river that knows its banks, and thought needle, not as a word but as a truth, the metal thing that pierces. His matchstick became a needle. Not a hesitant, half-transformed needle. A needle, clean and silver and complete, lying on the desk like it had always been there. He looked at it. He set his wand down. Hermione, next to him, had gotten about a third of the way through hers. The head had gone silver and the wood was thinning, and she was so focused on her own progress that she didn't see his for a full 30 seconds. When she did, her quill stopped moving mid-note. McGonagall had been walking the rows. She stopped at Harry's desk and looked at the needle. She picked it up, turned it in the light, fully transformed, fully functional. She set it back down. Mr. Potter, she said, and her voice was the controlled instrument again, but it was doing something more complex than usual, something layered. Can you show me the wand motion you used? I didn't really use one, Harry said honestly. A pause. Do it again, she said. Different matchstick. She produced one from her desk. He took it. Needle, he thought, not as a word but as a purpose, and the matchstick became a needle in the same clean, immediate way. McGonagall stood very still beside his desk for a moment. Then she said, in a tone of absolute academic precision that was doing excellent work concealing everything else, acceptable. 10 points to Gryffindor. She walked on to the next student. Harry heard Hermione's quill start moving again, very fast. After the lesson, the other students filing out, Ron attempting to explain to Seamus that his matchstick was technically a needle if you squinted, McGonagall said, without looking up from her desk, Mr. Potter. A word. Harry stayed. The others filed past. Hermione lingered in the doorway and Harry shook his head slightly, and she left with visible reluctance. McGonagall set down her quill and looked at him directly. She had very sharp eyes, dark and clear, and they were doing something that wasn't their professional expression. The transfiguration was instinctive, she said. Not a question. Yes, Harry said. The binding the hat revealed, she said, and the professionalism cracked slightly on binding, a fracture as thin as a hair, has it, do you feel any different? Since last night? Like a room with the furniture in the right place, Harry said. I told Neville that last night. She looked at him. Something moved across her face. Professor, he said, you wrote the 7th letter. She was quiet for a moment. I personally delivered your Hogwarts acceptance to the Dursleys when you were a baby, she said. I sat outside their house for a day watching them, and I had doubts about leaving you there, and I voiced those doubts, and I was advised against them. A pause. I should not have allowed myself to be advised. It was not an apology in the formal sense. It was something harder and more honest than an apology. Harry respected it. I'm all right, he said. You shouldn't have had to be, she said. A beat of silence that held the weight of 10 years. The ministry letter, Harry said, because he was going to address all of it, might as well be now. The one advising me to refrain from magic pending review. Her eyes sharpened. You received one. This morning. That was fast, she said, and the control in her voice had gone briefly, genuinely cold. Not cold at Harry. Cold at whoever had moved that quickly. Can they follow through on it? Harry asked. Statute 13b, you've read it. She said it less like a question and more like a recalibration of her expectations. I read the letter. I know what 13b says. I'm asking if they can apply it here. The Founder's magic is not a standard underage casting, she said. You did not perform the charms, the hat performed them in response to your magical core. The legal distinction is, not settled, but there is a distinction. So it depends on who's making the argument, Harry said. It depends, she said, on who wants it settled which way. Harry nodded. He picked up his bag. Thank you, Professor Potter. He stopped at the door. The headmaster will want to speak with you today. Before dinner, I expect. He'll frame it as pastoral care. And what would you call it? Harry said. McGonagall looked at him for a long moment. I would call it a conversation you should go into with your eyes open, she said. Which I suspect they already are. Harry left. Dumbledore's office was on the 5th floor behind a gargoyle that moved for him before he'd said the password, which told him either the headmaster had altered it to respond to him or the gargoyle had its own opinions. The circular room was extraordinary, cabinets full of silver instruments that spun and whispered and breathed, portraits of previous headmasters doing varying degrees of pretending to be asleep, and Fawkes the Phoenix on his perch, who looked at Harry when he entered with round, intelligent eyes, and made a sound like the beginning of a song. Harry looked at the Phoenix for a moment. The Phoenix looked back, and then, doing something Harry had not expected and would think about for a long time afterward, it spread one wing briefly, not fully, not a display, just a gesture, like a hand raised in acknowledgement, before folding it back. Harry. Dumbledore was at his desk, and the warmth in his voice was real, Harry was fairly certain, which made it more complicated rather than less. Please, sit. Harry sat. He noted the instruments, the portraits, the desk, the specific things Dumbledore had chosen to have in his sightline. He noted that Fawkes was between him and the door, which was not threatening but was a positioning choice. Last night was quite remarkable, Dumbledore said. Yes, Harry said. The hat has not invoked the Founder's revelation charms in its entire 1,000-year history, Dumbledore said. Not once. Whatever the Founders designed them for, they never encountered a student who required them. He paused. Until last night. You sealed one of them, Harry said. The warmth in Dumbledore's eyes did something, not vanished, shifted. Became more careful. I did. You knew what it was going to reveal. I did, Dumbledore said again, in the same even tone, and Harry noticed he did not say I'm sorry or I had reasons or any of the dozen things a person says when they're defending an action. He said I did the way you admit something you have decided to be honest about without conceding that the decision was wrong. I'd like to know what it was, Harry said. You will, Dumbledore said. When the time is right. That phrase, Harry said, is one I intend to push back on every time you use it. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment over his half-moon spectacles. Then something happened in his expression that was genuinely unexpected, something that looked like it might, if it had more room to develop, become respect. Noted, he said. And fair. The binding, Harry said. The one the hat described. 2 layers. Old magic, and something more recent. Yes. Did you place the second layer? A pause. Long enough to mean something. There is a protection on you, Dumbledore said carefully, that I maintained. After Godric's Hollow. It was placed in love, and yes, I reinforced certain aspects of it. To keep you safe. A cage is a kind of safe, Harry said. Dumbledore's eyes did something complicated. It was never intended to, I know, Harry said, and he meant it, not as absolution but as information. I'm not saying your intention was malicious. I'm saying the effect was to limit magic I was born with. And I'd like it understood that going forward, that's not something I'll accept. The office was very quiet. Fawkes made another soft sound. You are 11 years old, Dumbledore said, and there was something real in his voice, not manipulation, genuine feeling. The world will not, there are people, Harry, who will look at what happened last night and see a weapon. I have been, for a long time, trying to ensure that you are seen as more than that. The way to do that, Harry said, is not to make me less than I am. Another long pause. No, Dumbledore said, eventually. Perhaps not. They looked at each other, the old man behind his extraordinary desk and the 11-year-old sitting across from him, and the power in the room was not simply Dumbledore's, and both of them knew it. The Ministry letter, Harry said. I am handling the Ministry, Dumbledore said, and this had a different quality, firmer, less equivocal. Whatever his complications were regarding Harry, regarding the Ministry he had no complications. You will not face any consequences from last night. I will ensure it. Thank you, Harry said, and meant it, and stood up. One more thing. Yes. The 49th charm. Contamination over my scar. He watched Dumbledore's face. What's in my scar? And for the first time in the conversation, Dumbledore looked away. We will discuss that, he said, to somewhere near his desk surface, when the time, Professor, Harry said. Dumbledore looked up. I'm going to find out, Harry said, simply. With or without the conversation. I'd rather have the conversation. But I'm telling you plainly so there's no misunderstanding later, I'm going to find out. Fawkes sang a single note from his perch. Clear and clean and carrying, like a bell rung in a large room. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment and then, very quietly, said something that Harry would think about for the rest of the year. I know, he said. I think, perhaps, that's exactly what you were always meant to do. That evening Harry sat in the common room with Hermione's notes and his own additions and Ron who was technically doing homework but was mostly watching the fire and thinking about Quidditch tryouts, and Neville who had managed to transfigure half his matchstick into something that was approximately needle-shaped from certain angles, and outside the castle the Scottish hills were dark under new September stars. The Ministry letter was in his pocket. Dumbledore's admission, I reinforced certain aspects of it, was in his head. The 60% signature match was in Hermione's notes, which she'd pressed into his hands before dinner with the corners turned to the relevant passage. He picked up his own quill. At the top of a fresh sheet of parchment, he wrote, what I know. What I don't. What I intend to find out. He looked at the blank page under the heading. Then he started writing, and he wrote until the fire burned low and Ron fell asleep in his chair, and Hermione, who had lasted longest, finally closed her own books and looked across at him and said, "Harry." He looked up. "Whatever is in your scar," she said quietly. "Whatever the binding was meant to contain or conceal. Whatever Dumbledore sealed in the 50th charm." She held his gaze. "We'll work it out." "Not you'll work it out. We." Harry looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded, once, and she gathered her books and went upstairs, and he sat alone with the dying fire and his parchment and the comfortable, purposeful feeling of someone who has oriented toward a problem and intends to solve it. He was 11 years old. He had been, for as long as he could remember, managed and minimized and contained, first by the Dursleys and then, it appeared, by forces that considered themselves considerably more benevolent. He was done being contained. Tomorrow he would explore the castle. He had 48 hours before classes filled the schedule, and there were things in this building, old things, Founderera things, things that the 47th charm had briefly illuminated in the network of old magic under the stone, that were waiting to be found by someone who carried all 4 houses' magic in an undiluted line. He had a feeling they'd been waiting for quite a while. He put out the last lamp and went to bed. Chapter 3, What the Founders Left Behind. The castle was different at 5 in the morning. Not quieter, quiet was relative, and Hogwarts at 5 in the morning had its own vocabulary of sound, the shift of portraits between frames, the distant murmur of water through pipes that had been carrying water for 1,000 years, the occasional creak of stone settling the way old things settle, not deteriorating but adjusting, making room for the day. But the quality of the castle's attention was different this early. During the day the building felt occupied, managed, purposeful. At 5 in the morning it felt like itself. Harry had woken at 4:45 with the same feeling he'd gone to sleep with, the sense of something that needed finding. He dressed quietly, left the dormitory while Ron was still producing sounds that were technically not snoring, and went down into the common room and out through the portrait hole before he'd fully decided where he was going. The fat lady was asleep in her frame, or performing sleep convincingly. He stepped past her carefully. He'd been exploring the castle for the 2 days since the sorting in the half-hours before breakfast and the gaps between lessons, building a map in his head the way he'd always built maps of new places, through movement rather than documentation, the body's knowledge rather than the mind's. He knew the castle's rhythms already better than most second years, because he paid attention the way you learn to pay attention when your environment is frequently hostile, constantly, automatically, below the level of conscious thought. What he was looking for was not on any floor he'd been to yet. The 47th charm had shown him the network of old magic under the castle, briefly, a flash of illumination like lightning over a landscape, gone before you could map it, but his memory was good and what he'd seen was, major lines converging somewhere below the dungeons. Not in the dungeons. Below them. In the foundations of the castle itself, where the stone was oldest. He went down. Past the entrance hall, past the door to the dungeons, past the point where the staircase stopped being a staircase and became a wall, and then he stood at the wall and looked at it and felt something. Not magic exactly, or not magic as he'd felt it before, in spells and charms and the hat's screaming revelation. More like the awareness of depth. The sense of a room behind a wall that had never been described to you but that you know is there the way you know things in dreams. He pressed one hand flat against the stone. The stone was cold and very old and it knew he was there. He felt that with absolute certainty, the stone recognized something in his hand against it, something in the magic that had been cracking loose of its cage for 10 years and was now free to move the way it wanted to move. All 4 houses, undiluted. He didn't say anything. He didn't perform any spell or recite any incantation. He just stood there with his hand on the stone and let himself be what he apparently was, completely, without reservation. The wall opened. Not dramatically. Not with grinding stone and sweeping dust in the manner of adventure stories. It opened the way a door opens when someone inside hears you knock and decides to answer, inward, smoothly, with a faint exhale of old air that smelled like parchment and iron and something floral that had no business being underground. Beyond it, stairs going down. Harry went down. The chamber was not large. That was the first thing that surprised him. He'd been expecting something vast and cathedral, the sort of underground space that announces its own importance through sheer scale. This room was maybe 40 feet across, roughly circular, with a ceiling low enough that a tall adult would have to be conscious of it. The walls were plain stone except for 4 alcoves, one at each cardinal point, and in each alcove a symbol he recognized from his intensive reading of the past 2 days: Gryffindor's sword, Ravenclaw's diadem, Hufflepuff's cup, Slytherin's locket, not the objects themselves, but the symbols, carved into the stone above each alcove with a depth and precision that suggested they'd been made with magic rather than tools. In the center of the room, a low stone table. On the table, 4 books. Not decorative books. Not locked books with dramatic clasps. Just books, the way books are books, worn covers, cracked spines, the particular softness of pages that have been handled by a very great many hands over a very long time. They were different sizes. They were different colors. They lay on the table in a roughly quadrilateral arrangement, pointing toward their respective alcoves. Harry walked to the table. He looked at the books without touching them. The one toward the Gryffindor alcove had a red cover worn to something closer to pink, with no title on the spine. The Ravenclaw one was blue, with small silver lettering he couldn't quite read from standing distance. The Hufflepuff one was yellow, genuinely yellow, bright and incongruous, and the most well-thumbed of the 4. The Slytherin one was green leather, and where the others looked handled and used and loved, this one looked considered. Careful. He reached for the red one first. "I wouldn't start with Gryffindors if I were you," said a voice behind him. He turned. A girl was sitting in the Gryffindor alcove, sitting in it the way you sit in an armchair, folded comfortably against the stone, her legs tucked sideways, her hair a pale blonde that seemed to generate its own light in the dim chamber. She had large, silver-gray eyes that looked at him with the particular quality of someone seeing several things simultaneously, none of which were causing her any concern. She was wearing her Hogwarts robes with a radish earring in one ear and what appeared to be a necklace made of bottle caps. She was reading a magazine that was upside down. Harry looked at her for a moment. "How long have you been here?" he said. "Since about 3, she said cheerfully. "The Nargles were very insistent this morning. They often are when something important is about to happen." She turned a page of the upside-down magazine. "I'm Luna. Luna Lovegood. Ravenclaw. Harry Potter," Harry said. "I know," she said. "The hat screamed about you. It was rather wonderful." She said this with simple, genuine appreciation, the way you describe a particularly good sunset. "You shouldn't start with Gryffindor's book because it will tell you what you already know about yourself, and that's the least useful thing a book can do. Start with Hufflepuff's. It will tell you what you're missing." Harry looked at the yellow book. "Have you read them?" "I've read the Ravenclaw one," she said. "I can enter the room because of my house, but I can only fully engage with the one that matches me. You can engage with all 4, which is why the room let you open it." She tilted her head. "Did you know you breathed differently when you put your hand on the wall? Slower and deeper. Like someone coming home." "I wasn't aware of that," Harry said. "Most people aren't aware of half of what their bodies know," she said pleasantly. "It's one of the more unfortunate things about consciousness." She finally set the magazine down. It was called The Quibbler, Harry noted, and the headline appeared to be about a government conspiracy involving cheese. "The Ravenclaw book is a logic system. It's the most sophisticated magical problem-solving framework I've ever encountered, and I intend to come back for it approximately every day until I understand all of it." "Rowena wrote it herself." "Rowena Ravenclaw wrote it herself," Harry said. "Obviously," Luna said. "She wrote it for a student she expected. She expected all of them." She gestured at the 4 books. "They all did. All 4 founders wrote their books for a specific student. One who carried all of their houses. They knew it would happen eventually. They just didn't know when." She paused. Though Helga Hufflepuff apparently thought it would happen sooner. She was an optimist. Harry pulled the yellow book toward him and sat on the edge of the table and opened it. The first page said, in handwriting that was round and warm and slightly irregular, "For the student who is everyone's, and therefore nobody has thought to ask how they are doing." He read it twice. Then he turned the page. He was still reading when Luna said, "Someone's coming," and Harry looked up from page 43 of Helga Hufflepuff's book, which was less a book and more a manual on magical empathy, on the way magic moves through relationships rather than through individuals, dense and practical and utterly unlike anything in the first-year curriculum, to see Hermione Granger at the bottom of the stairs, slightly out of breath, her hair doing its ambitious morning thing, her eyes taking in the room at roughly the speed of someone photographing it. She stopped on the last step. Took in the alcoves, the symbols, the table, the 4 books. Looked at Luna. Looked at Harry. "How?" she said. "Hand on the wall," Harry said. "Second to last staircase landing below the dungeon level. Stone responds to all 4 house magics simultaneously." "How did you know where the wall was?" 47th charm, Harry said. "The one that mapped the old magic network under the castle." "I have a good memory." Hermione walked into the room properly and went immediately to the blue book on the table with the focused pull of someone whose feet have found what their eyes were looking for. She reached for it and then stopped herself with visible effort. "Should I?" "Luna says the room lets people engage with the book corresponding to their house," Harry said. "You're Gryffindor." "I'm Gryffindor," Hermione agreed, with the slight wistfulness of someone who'd been sorted into one excellent thing and is immediately confronted with another excellent thing that isn't quite theirs. "For what it's worth," Luna said from her alcove, "the Ravenclaw book is primarily concerned with pure theory. The Gryffindor book is concerned with application. Rowena always thought action without theory was reckless. Godric always thought theory without action was useless." She turned a page of her magazine. "They argued about it every single day for 30 years. Salazar thought they were both missing the point." "What was the point?" Harry said. "That's in his book," Luna said. Harry looked at the green leather book. He hadn't touched it yet. He hadn't been entirely sure he wanted to, which was an instinct he was busy examining for irrational bias and finding some. He reached out and opened the Slytherin book. The handwriting inside was precise and architectural, nothing like Hufflepuff's warm irregularity, controlled, deliberate, each letter placed as though it had considered its position carefully before committing. For the student who has been told who they are by people who are afraid of what they might become. This book is not about ambition. It is about the difference between what you are told you want and what you actually want, and the courage required to know the difference. Harry stared at that for a long time. "Right," he said quietly. "Slytherin got a bad reputation," Luna said, with academic cheerfulness. "He was a difficult man, but he wasn't actually villainous. He was simply the one who understood best that systems of power require people to believe those systems are natural rather than constructed. And he found that intolerable." She paused. "He left for the same reason most people leave places. Not because he hated the place but because the place stopped letting him be honest." Hermione had been reading the Red Gryffindor book and taking notes simultaneously. She looked up. "It says here that Godric Gryffindor had a theory that magic operates most fully through conviction rather than technique. That the primary barrier between a wizard and their potential is not skill but self-concept." She looked at Harry. "That matches what the hat revealed. The binding wasn't limiting your magic by capping your power, it was interfering with your self-concept. With your ability to function from a full and unconflicted identity. Like a cage for a fire," Harry said. "Exactly like," she stopped. "You already knew this." "The hat said it in those words," Harry said. "But yes." Hermione wrote something. "So the binding coming loose, or being forced loose by the revelation charms, it didn't give you power you didn't have. It gave you access to power you already possessed. Which means whatever Dumbledore was maintaining," Harry said, the thing he called a protection, it wasn't making me safer. It was making me less. He would say those are the same thing, Hermione said. He would be wrong, Harry said, without heat. Luna, from her alcove, said, there is a fifth book. They both looked at her. She was looking at the space between the Slytherin alcove and the Gryffindor alcove, the stretch of wall between them that had no symbol above it. The fifth book isn't in the room yet, she said. The founders each contributed one. The fifth was meant to be written by the student the room was built for. It's the synthesis. The part that none of them could write because none of them were all four things simultaneously. She turned another page. You're supposed to write it. Eventually. Harry looked at the blank stretch of wall. There was something there, the faintest outline in the stone, a rectangular impression, the ghost of a fifth alcove waiting to be carved. Not today, he said. Obviously not today, Luna agreed. You've only just arrived. He came back to the chamber twice more that week, always early, always alone or with Hermione or sometimes with Luna, who appeared and disappeared with the comfortable arbitrariness of someone whose schedule was governed by entirely different principles than everyone else's. He worked through Hufflepuff's book with the focused intensity he brought to everything, and what he found there was not sentimental. Helga Hufflepuff had been, under her warmth, a rigorous magical theorist, and her framework for understanding magic as relational rather than individual was the most radical thing Harry had read yet, more disruptive in its implications than anything in the curriculum. The implications being, magic is not a property of individuals. It is a property of connections. The most powerful magic in history, every major spell, every great enchantment, had been produced not by a single caster operating at full capacity but by a caster in genuine connection with something larger than themselves. Other people. Places. Ideas. The more genuine and unguarded the connection, the more fully the magic could express itself. Harry thought about his mother and what she had done at Godric's Hollow. He thought about it for a long time. He did not think only about books and chamber discoveries. He also went to classes, because he was 11 and enrolled in an institution and because several of the classes were genuinely interesting. Charms was taught by Professor Flitwick, a small man with an enormous amount of good humor and a technical precision that Harry found immediately engaging. Flitwick taught like someone who loved the subject more than the role, and the difference was audible. He got excited, genuinely excited, in the middle of explanations, and would sometimes digress into the history or theory of a charm before catching himself and returning to the practical with a small, embarrassed cough. Harry liked him. He also, on the third day, Wingardium Leviosa his feather on the first attempt, watched it rise steadily to the ceiling while Flitwick watched with an expression he was attempting to keep within the standard range of professorial approval and losing, and then looked at Hermione's feather already rising beside his and said nothing because she was clearly just as annoyed as he was that she hadn't gotten there first. Simultaneously, Flitwick noted, in his careful voice. 10 points to Gryffindor each. A pause. Mr. Potter, could I ask you to, he hesitated. How does the charm feel? When you perform it? Harry thought about it. Like asking nicely, he said. Not demanding. Like making a request and meaning it. Flitwick looked at him for a long moment, his small face doing something thoughtful. Yes, he said. That is, yes. That is exactly the correct framework. He made a note on his parchment with a quill that moved with the speed of someone documenting something they don't want to forget. Thank you. After class, as they walked toward the great hall for lunch, Hermione said quietly, he knows about last night. What the charms revealed. Flitwick. Most of the teachers do, Harry said. The ones who were in the hall. Flitwick's reaction is different from McGonagall's and Dumbledore's, she said. He's not worried. He's interested. Academically interested. Luna said Ravenclaw's framework is about theory. Flitwick is the charms professor and the head of Ravenclaw House. Harry adjusted his bag. He's probably spent 30 years studying exactly the kind of magic the hat unleashed. Do you think he'd, Hermione started. Yes, Harry said. I think he'd be useful to talk to. She smiled, and it was the particular smile of someone who'd been thinking the same thing and is pleased the other person got there without prompting. The first real confrontation of the year happened on a Thursday. They were coming back from the library, Harry, Hermione, and Neville, who had been doing his herbology homework with the focused determination of a person who has found the one subject in which he feels genuinely competent and intends to protect that feeling with everything he has. When Draco Malfoy stepped into the corridor ahead of them with his two granite architecture companions and the specific posture of someone who has spent time preparing for this moment. Potter, he said. He had a clear, carrying voice that managed to be both casual and pointed, the voice of someone who'd been raised in rooms where people listened when he spoke and had never had reason to doubt this would continue. Harry stopped. Not because Malfoy was blocking him exactly, there was room to go around, but because this was a conversation that was going to happen and postponing it served nobody. He looked at Malfoy and waited. Malfoy looked back. Up close, his expressions were more readable than they'd been at the teacher's table or across the Great Hall. The practiced ease was there, the one that matched his voice, but under it something was working. Something uncertain. His eyes moved over Harry with the specific attention of someone trying to reconcile two different pictures. What was that, he said. At the sorting. That, what you did. What the hat did, Harry said. What happened to you, Malfoy said, and the correction had an edge to it that wasn't quite contempt. It was something more pressured than contempt. Ancient magic triggered by my presence, Harry said. If you want more detail than that you'll need to read about Founders Era Revelation charms. Hermione can recommend a source. I don't need, Malfoy started, and then stopped, and something shifted in his expression. He changed direction entirely. My father is on the Board of Governors. He's already written to them about what happened. About what was broadcast. What about it? Harry said. It's not, Malfoy stopped again. He was having an argument with himself behind his face and losing parts of it. Things like that don't just happen. People don't just, the hat doesn't just do that. There are rules about what magic can be used at, there are rules, Harry agreed. The Founder's magic is exempt from them. Your father can write all the letters he wants. It won't change what happened or what was revealed. What was revealed, Malfoy said, and here was the core of it, finally, the thing the rest had been approaching, was that you have Slytherin's bloodline. Among others, yes. That's, Malfoy's jaw tightened. That's not possible. Potter is a Gryffindor name. Potter is, your father was Gryffindor, your mother was Muggle-born, there is no Slytherin line, and yet, Harry said. The hallway was very quiet. Neville had gone still beside Harry in the way Neville went still when he was paying close attention, not frozen, just calibrated, gathering himself. Hermione had her arms folded and was watching Malfoy with the forensic interest she brought to most things. My father, Malfoy said, and his voice had gone quieter and more careful, the performance stripped back considerably, has spent my entire life telling me what the Slytherin line means. What it stands for. What it requires. He paused. If you carry it, then either my father is right about what it means and your everything he says is wrong with the wizarding world, or, he stopped. Or your father is wrong about what it means, Harry said. Not unkindly. Malfoy's face did something it clearly wasn't used to doing, it became uncertain, genuinely uncertain, a crack in the architecture. It lasted only a moment before the performance reassembled itself, smoother than before but slightly less convincing. My father is not wrong, he said. All right, Harry said. He's not. I heard you the first time. Malfoy looked at him for a long, charged moment. Then, you're not what I expected. No, Harry said. I don't imagine I am. Malfoy walked past him, not aggressively, just walking, his companions falling into step, and Harry watched them go and thought about Slytherin's book and what it said about the difference between what you're told you want and what you actually want. Neville exhaled beside him. He's trying to reconcile something," Hermione said, still watching the corridor where Malfoy had gone. "His entire framework for understanding the world requires certain things to be fixed in certain positions. You've disturbed those positions." "I've disturbed a lot of positions," Harry said. "Yes," she said, almost approvingly. "You have." Neville said, with the tentative quality of someone contributing an observation they're not sure is useful, "He was actually asking you something. Wasn't he?" Under the bluster. "He was actually asking you what it meant." Harry looked at him. "Yeah," he said. "He was." "Are you going to tell him?" "He's not ready to hear it yet," Harry said. "But eventually." Friday morning brought a letter from Gringotts that was more interesting than the first one. It was addressed not simply to Harry James Potter, as most mail was, but to Harry James Potter, heir of the ancient and noble house of Potter, heir of the ancient and noble house of Peverell, an identified claimant of the legacy of the Founders' Compact. The last title had been handwritten in a different ink from the rest, added after the other printing, with the air of something that had only become relevant recently. He read it twice. Then he showed it to Hermione. She read it 3 times. Her quill was moving before she'd finished. "Founders' Compact," she said. "You know what that is?" Harry said. "It's referenced in Hogwarts, a history in 2 sentences and no context," she said, with the frustration of someone who considers 2 sentences insufficient by roughly a chapter's worth of margin. "A compact sealed by the 4 founders at the establishment of Hogwarts. Its terms have never been made public. The only thing that's known is that it contains provisions for something called the heir of the compact, and that no one has ever been identified as the heir before." "Until now," Harry said. "Until now," she confirmed. She set down her quill and looked at him with the clear-eyed directness she'd had since the first morning in the common room. "Harry, this keeps getting larger." "It does," he agreed. "There are people in this school, people with access to significant power, who have a direct interest in that not being true." "There are," he agreed again. "You're not worried," she said, not accusatorially. Observationally. "I'm taking it seriously," he said. "That's not the same as worried." She looked at him for a moment. Then, "Luna says the room has been there for 1,000 years waiting for you. Gringotts has a compact from the founders with your name effectively on it." The hat screamed 52 illegal charms into the Great Hall. She paused. "Whoever placed that binding on you, whoever thought it was a good idea to limit all of this, what exactly did they think was going to happen?" "They thought," Harry said, "that they could manage it. That if they just kept a lid on it long enough, eventually there'd be a good moment. A safe moment. A moment when it could all come out in a controlled way." He looked at the letter. "They were wrong about how much pressure builds up when you put a lid on something." "The hat didn't just remove the lid," Hermione said. "It blew it off entirely." "In front of 500 witnesses," Harry said. "In front of 500 witnesses," she agreed. And then, despite herself, she smiled. Not a polished smile or an academic one. Something genuine and slightly delighted. It really was rather spectacular. "It was," Harry said. Saturday morning, early, the chamber below the dungeons. Harry sat cross-legged on the stone floor with Hufflepuff's book in his lap and the 4 alcoves at the cardinal points around him, and he was not reading. He was thinking about his mother. Magic is a property of connections. Not individuals. Connections. His mother had stood between Voldemort and a crib and had died, and something in that act, something in the connection between a mother and a child, something in the absolute, unconditional, unguarded nature of it, had produced magic so ancient and fundamental that it had defeated the most powerful dark wizard in living memory. Had left a mark that the 49th charm called contamination and recoiled from. Had placed a protection that Dumbledore had apparently reinforced and called safety. A connection so powerful it functioned as armor. And a binding had been placed on him, possibly in the same night, possibly by the same person, possibly with the same intention, and the binding was cracking now, had been cracking for years, because the connection that produced it was still there, still his, still operative. He thought about the word contamination. About the way the charm had recoiled. If his mother's sacrifice was the protection, the armor, then what was contaminating his scar wasn't her magic. Her magic was clean. The charm had confirmed it, it had pressed against the scar and found something else. Something that had come from outside. Something foreign. Something that had arrived the same night she died. He looked at the blank stretch of wall where the fifth alcove waited, and he thought, the something that killed her didn't just leave a scar. It left something of itself. The chamber was quiet. The old magic in the walls pulsed with the slow rhythm of something alive. "You've worked it out," said Luna from the doorway, where she had appeared with her magazine and her bottle-cap necklace and her absolute absence of dramatic timing. "Part of it," Harry said. She came in and sat against the Ravenclaw alcove. "Which part?" "The scar isn't just a scar," he said. "It's a container." Luna turned a page. "Yes," she said. The charm said contamination and Dumbledore sealed the next one immediately. The 51st and 52nd went off together and produced that feeling, that gravitational pull, that sense of something enormous. She paused. "Like standing next to a star. Or like standing next to a dark object of great power that contains a fragment of someone's soul," Harry said. The chamber was very quiet. Luna looked at him over her magazine with her silver eyes. "That's very specific," she said. "The magic makes sense if you assume it," he said. "A killing curse reflects off a protection built from sacrificial love. The caster is, partially destroyed. But a soul that's already been divided, a soul that's been deliberately split through murder," he'd been reading. He'd been reading things the school library required a teacher's note to access, and he'd obtained the note from Flitwick, who had given it without asking why, with an expression of someone deciding to extend trust. A divided soul, when its host body is destroyed, needs somewhere to go. And if there's a sufficiently powerful mark on the nearest living being, a scar, Luna said. "A scar," Harry said. "A piece of Tom Riddle. In my scar. That's what the charm found." Luna set her magazine down. Her expression was its usual composed equanimity, but there was something underneath it, not fear. Something more considered. Something old. "Dumbledore knows," she said. "Dumbledore knows," Harry agreed. "Which is what he sealed the 50th charm to prevent you from knowing. From being publicly broadcast in the Great Hall at 11 years old, in front of everyone," Harry said, and here he was genuinely fair, he could see the logic of it. In that moment, that specific decision, he wasn't wrong. "But now you know anyway," Luna said. "Now I know anyway," Harry said. "Which I told him was going to happen." Luna looked at the blank fifth alcove wall. "The fifth book is going to be interesting," she said. "It's going to be honest," Harry said. "That's what will make it interesting." She stood, gathered her magazine, and was about to go when she turned at the bottom of the stairs and said, "Harry." He looked up. "There's a ministry representative arriving tomorrow," she said, with the same pleasant composure she used for everything. "Someone more senior than the clipboard man. They're going to want to evaluate you formally. My father has sources." She paused. "They are going to ask you to perform magic for them under observation, to assess whether the events of the first were an isolated anomaly or," she stopped, seemingly finding the right word. "Or evidence of something they should be afraid of," Harry said. "Yes," she said. "You should know before they ask." "Thank you," Harry said. She nodded, once, and went up the stairs, and Harry sat in the chamber with the 4 books and the 4 alcoves and the blank waiting wall, and he thought about a fragment of a soul in his forehead and a binding placed over it, and an old man with half-moon glasses who knew both things and had been trying, in his complicated and well-intentioned and deeply flawed way, to manage the situation. He thought about Helga Hufflepuff's words. "Magic is a property of connections." He thought about what it meant that he was connected, however involuntarily, however contaminating, to the thing in his scar. And he thought about what it would mean to deal with it. Not yet. He was 11. He had time. But the knowing of it changed the shape of everything, the way understanding a map changes a landscape you've been walking through blind. Nothing in the territory moved, but now you knew where you were standing. He closed Hufflepuff's book. He put his hand on the stone floor of the chamber, the cool ancient stone, and felt the old magic pulse under his palm like something patient, something that had been waiting for a very specific kind of person for a very long time. He thought, I'm here. The castle, in its old and patient way, answered back. Chapter 4, The Boy Who Wouldn't Be Managed. The ministry representative arrived on a Sunday, which Harry found telling. Sundays were unstructured, no classes, no mandatory schedules, no institutional framework to hide behind. Whoever had chosen Sunday had chosen it deliberately, picking the day when a student was most likely to feel unmoored, most likely to cooperate simply because cooperation was easier than navigating something uncomfortable without the scaffolding of routine. Harry had been awake since 5. He'd eaten breakfast before anyone else arrived in the great hall, read 30 pages of Slytherin's book, and was sitting in the common room with his list, what I know, what I don't, what I intend to find out, when the prefect knocked on the portrait hole at 9:15 and relayed that the headmaster requested Mr. Potter's presence at his earliest convenience, which translated from institutional language to immediately. Ron looked up from his exploding snap game. Ministry thing? Probably, Harry said, standing. Want us to come? Harry considered this. Not to Dumbledore's office. But be in the corridor outside the gargoyle at 10. Ron nodded like this was a completely normal request, which was one of the things Harry had come to appreciate about him. Hermione, from the armchair, said, I've prepared a summary of the legal framework governing ministry evaluation of underage magical anomalies. It's 7 pages. Give me the most important part, Harry said. They can observe. They cannot compel you to perform. Any evaluation requires your consent or a guardian's consent, and Dumbledore functions as guardian in absentia for Hogwarts students only in matters of academic and pastoral welfare. Magical ability assessment falls under a different clause. They cannot force you to demonstrate anything. She paused. Also, the Founder's Magic Charter supersedes ministry oversight in all matters originating from Hogwarts's foundational enchantments. So I have 2 layers of protection. 3, if you count the fact that they don't actually know what you can do and people tend to be cautious around things they don't understand. That's not a legal protection, Harry said. It's a practical one, she said. Sometimes that's better. He took the stairs 2 at a time. There were 2 of them in Dumbledore's office. The clipboard man from the sorting, Harry had learned his name from Ron's father's communication, Algernon Rowe, senior assessor for the Office of Underage Magical Regulation, and a woman Harry hadn't seen before, who was the more interesting of the 2 by a significant margin. She was perhaps 50, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of posture that announced former military affiliation even in civilian clothes. She wore ministry robes in a deep plum that were immaculate and entirely unexpressive of personality, and she watched Harry enter the room with eyes that were doing what trained, intelligent eyes do, assessment, rapid and thorough, making decisions he couldn't see the outcome of. Her name, Dumbledore said, introducing them with his standard warm ceremony, was Madame Cordelia Vance, Deputy Director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Not underage regulation anymore. Law enforcement. Harry shook her hand. Her grip was firm and measured, neither aggressive nor soft. He met her eyes and held them for the correct number of seconds, which turned out to be slightly longer than she expected, and something in her assessment recalibrated by a fraction. Mr. Potter, she said. Please sit. The office was the same as before, instruments spinning, portraits pretending, Fawkes on his perch. Fawkes looked at Harry and sang one private note. Harry sat. He looked at Vance and Rowe and at Dumbledore, who was standing to one side in the particular way he stood when he was present and choosing not to lead, present enough to be available, back enough to let others move. Harry noted this as a specific tactical choice. You understand why we're here, Vance said. Not a question. You want to assess what happened at the sorting and determine whether it constitutes a risk under ministry regulatory framework, Harry said. Vance's expression moved very slightly. Not surprise, she'd been briefed on him clearly, she wasn't surprised by articulate, but adjustment. A small recalibration. That's accurate. You're welcome to ask me questions, Harry said. I understand my consent is required for any formal evaluation of magical ability, and I'm extending that consent for conversation. I'm not extending it for demonstration. If you want to see what I can do, watch me in class. Rowe, who had his clipboard and was writing on it with the automaticity of a man who is more comfortable recording events than participating in them, paused mid-word. He looked up. Vance looked at Harry with the eyes that were still running their assessment. That's a very specific understanding of the regulatory framework for someone your age. I have an excellent friend, Harry said. A pause. Then Vance said, the events of September 1st. The 52 charms. Walk me through your experience of them. The hat spoke to me, Harry said. It identified a binding on my magic and asked, in its way, whether to trigger the Founder's revelation charms to manage the binding's fracture. I said yes. You consented to the charm discharge. I did. You understood what would happen. I understood something would happen, Harry said. The hat explained the principle. The specifics were outside my ability to predict. And the binding, Vance said, and her voice changed quality here, became more precise, a scalpel rather than a general instrument. Did you know about it before the sorting? I knew something was wrong, Harry said. I didn't have the vocabulary for it. The binding originated from, the night Voldemort killed my parents, Harry said clearly, and at the name every portrait in the room developed a sudden interest in its own frame, and Rose Quill stopped entirely, and Vance's eyes did something sharp and contained. I don't know its full origin. I'm in the process of investigating that. You're investigating it, Vance said. Yes. You're 11. Age doesn't change the relevance of the information, Harry said. It's about me. I have an interest in understanding it. Vance was quiet for a moment. She had the specific quality of stillness of someone who knows how to inhabit silence without filling it, and Harry sat in it with her, comfortable, waiting. The Founder's Compact, she said. Yes. You're aware that the Compact's terms have never been formally reviewed by the Ministry. I'm aware, Harry said. I believe that's because the Ministry's authority doesn't extend to reviewing them. Something moved in Vance's expression, not quite a smile, more the precursor to one that never fully materialized. The charter language on that point is contested. I imagine it will continue to be, Harry said. Dumbledore, from his position near the window, made a quiet sound that was not quite a laugh. Vance looked at Harry for a long moment. Then she said something he hadn't anticipated, I am not here to restrict you, Mr. Potter. He waited. I am here, she said, because my department received 17 separate communications following the events of September 1st from individuals whose names I won't share but whose institutional influence I will describe as significant. All 17 of those communications recommended, in various terms and with varying degrees of subtlety, that you be assessed, monitored, restricted, and ideally managed through channels that would make your abilities effectively invisible to the general wizarding public. She paused. I am here, rather than sending someone to enact those recommendations, because I prefer to form my own conclusions. The room was quite quiet. And? Harry said. My conclusion, Vance said carefully, is that you are not a regulatory problem. You are a political problem. Those are categorically different things and require categorically different responses. She closed the small folio sheet had open on her knee. You will not receive any formal restriction from my department. The review is complete and its outcome is no action required. She glanced at Rowe, who wrote something on his clipboard with the particular speed of someone who has been waiting to write it. However, Harry said. The 17 individuals who wrote to my department will not stop because I've chosen not to act. They will find other avenues. Some of them have considerable access to those avenues. She met his eyes. I am telling you this because you appear to be the kind of person who benefits from accurate information. I am, Harry said. Then be accurate about this. The people who find you threatening are not idiots. They're not simply afraid of your power. They're afraid of what your existence means for frameworks they've spent decades constructing. Those frameworks benefit them. They will protect them. I appreciate the honesty, Harry said. Don't thank me yet, Vance said. The honesty comes at a cost. I'll want something in return, eventually. Not now. Later, when you're older and the situation has developed. She stood. Consider it an investment in a future conversation. She extended her hand. Harry shook it again, same grip as before from him, and this time she let the assessment run slightly longer before releasing. Rowe followed her to the door, still writing. At the threshold Vance turned and said, to the room in general rather than to anyone specifically, the hat was right, by the way. Whatever it broadcast. The parts of it we could interpret, they were all accurate. Accurate and verified by 3 independent archival sources. A beat. I thought someone should confirm that. Then she left. The gargoyle descended to let them out, the door closed, and Harry sat in Dumbledore's office with the instruments spinning and the portraits breathing and Fawkes watching him from his perch with round, knowing eyes. Dumbledore moved to his desk and sat. He looked at Harry over his spectacles with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously, relief, calculation, something that was working very hard to be openness without fully getting there. Well, he said. She'll be useful later, Harry said. You impressed her, Dumbledore said. She impressed me, Harry said. That's rarer. A pause. Then Dumbledore said, there's something we need to discuss. The 5th floor corridor, Harry said. Dumbledore's expression shifted. Not surprise, this was a man nearly beyond genuine surprise, but something close to it. You know about it. I know there's something on the 5th floor corridor you don't want students near, Harry said. I've felt the additional enchantments on it since the 2nd day. There's a locked door with about 9 separate wards on it and you've redirected the corridor traffic with a misdirection charm that most people don't notice because it's been there long enough that the castle has absorbed it. He paused. I notice things. Yes, Dumbledore said. You do. He interlaced his fingers on the desk in the way he had when he was about to say something that he'd decided to be honest about within specific parameters. There is an object in that corridor. An object of very great power and value that is being kept here temporarily because it has been moved from a location that was compromised. It is not relevant to you. Is it the Philosopher's Stone? Harry said. The instruments in the room continued spinning. Fawkes continued watching. The portraits continued their elaborate pretense of sleep. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. How, he said. Nicholas Flamel, Harry said. Hermione found him in a library book. He's the only known creator of the stone, he's associated with you. The stone was reportedly moved from Gringotts Vault 713 following an attempted break-in on July 31st. He paused. My birthday. Someone tried to steal it on my birthday. Before I knew I was a wizard. That's not a coincidence I can ignore. No, Dumbledore said, and his voice had gone quieter. No, I suppose it isn't. Someone is after it, Harry said. Someone who is connected, however tenuously, to the thing that killed my parents. Dumbledore was very still. I'm not going to do anything about it, Harry said. I'm 11. It's your problem and you should handle it. I'm simply noting that I know, so that we don't have a conversation later where you're surprised that I knew and I'm pretending I didn't. He stood. The binding, the scar, the compact, those are my problems and I intend to handle them. The stone is yours. I just think we both do better work when we're not pretending to the other person. Dumbledore looked at him from behind his spectacles and said, after a long moment, Albus, he said. You may call me Albus, if you like. Harry picked up his bag. I'll think about it, he said, and left. In the corridor outside the gargoyle, Ron and Hermione were waiting exactly where he'd asked them to wait, and Neville was there too because Neville had seen them go down and quietly followed because that was, Harry was learning, very characteristic of Neville. He didn't announce his loyalty, he just showed up. Well? Ron said. No ministry action, Harry said. Vance closed the review. We're fine on that front. Hermione exhaled. Good. The legal counterarguments I prepared were solid, but I'd rather not have tested them. Dumbledore? Neville said. Working on it, Harry said. He looked at the three of them, Ron with his easy, uncomplicated readiness, Hermione with her quill already half out of her bag, Neville with his steady waiting eyes, and felt Hufflepuff's framework move in his chest. Magic is a property of connections. There's a philosopher's stone on the 5th floor. They stared at him. I'll explain over lunch, he said. The confrontation with Snape happened that afternoon, because apparently Sunday had decided to be thorough. Harry had been expecting it. Snape had been doing a specific thing in every class, potions, which was the only class he taught Harry directly, a thing that was categorically different from what Harry had seen him do with anyone else. With other students, Snape was precise and contemptuous and sometimes, when a student produced genuinely good work, acknowledging in the most minimal way possible. With Harry he was, watchful. Carefully, consistently, peculiarly watchful, in the way a person watches something they're trying to understand without letting on that they're trying to understand it. Harry had been watchful back. The potions classroom after class on Sunday was empty except for Harry, who'd stayed behind to finish a notation on his parchment that he'd started mid-lesson and hadn't wanted to break from, and Snape, who was at his desk doing something with a series of files and had not told Harry to leave. Harry finished the notation. He rolled the parchment. He was about to stand when Snape said, without looking up from the files, the 48th charm. Harry set the parchment down. It passed through the hall and temporarily induced clarity of identity in several students, Snape said. His voice was its usual carefully controlled instrument, flat, precise, zero ornamentation, but it was doing something he probably thought wasn't audible. I've reviewed the documented effects of the revelation charms in the historical record. Charm 48 was specifically designed to resonate with suppressed self-knowledge. He paused. It had an effect on everyone in the hall. Including the teachers, Harry said. A pause. Including several people who considered themselves beyond being affected by it, yes. Harry waited. Snape set down a file with the precise care of someone who is controlling the movement of their hands very deliberately. Your mother, he said, was the most talented witch I have ever known. The potions classroom was quiet. Preserved things floated in jars. Something bubbled faintly in a cauldron that was never entirely cold. I know, Harry said. I knew her, Snape said, and the past tense of that landed the way past tenses land when the person saying them has been living in them for a long time. Before Hogwarts. During. After. A pause that had decades in it. After her death he stopped. Started again differently. There is something I believed about you before I met you. A set of assumptions I had constructed based on insufficient information. That I was my father, Harry said. Snape's eyes moved to him sharply. I look like him, Harry said. I know. Everyone who knew him says so immediately. They look at my face and see him. He looked steadily back at Snape. I'm not him. I'm not my mother either. I'm something that came from both of them, which isn't the same as being either one. Snape looked at him for a long, careful moment. The thing that had been working behind his face since the sorting night, the involuntary window Harry had clocked from across the great hall, was visible now, more of it, in the closer space. It was complicated enough that Harry couldn't fully read it, and he'd gotten very good at reading people. It was grief and guilt and something that had been recalibrating since a hat screamed in a great hall and a charm pressed against a boy's scar and said contamination and flinched away. The 48th charm, Harry said, showed you something about yourself. Snape said nothing. It doesn't require comment, Harry said. I'm not asking you to explain yourself to me. I'm 11. I don't need your confession. He picked up the parchment. But I'm also not my father. And whatever assumptions you built on that, they need rebuilding. He stood. You're an exceptional potions teacher. I'd rather not spend 7 years in a class where the teacher has decided what I am. Snape stared at him. That's all, Harry said, and walked to the door. Potter. He stopped. In potions, Snape said, carefully, like testing a structure before putting weight on it, precision is not merely technical. It is a form of respect. Respect for the properties of what you're working with. For what they are rather than what you require them to be. A pause. You appear to understand that already. Harry stood at the door. Hermione's notes say my mother's practical potions work was extraordinary. Her theoretical understanding was equally so, Snape said. She thought about why things worked, not merely whether they worked. He paused. You have the same quality. Harry looked at him. Then he said, thank you, Professor, and meant it, and left. In the corridor, alone for a moment before the castle's traffic found him again, he stood and breathed and thought about a charm that induced clarity of identity and what it might have shown a man who had spent 15 years living in a specific story about who he was and why. He thought Snape would be all right. Eventually. It was going to be a complicated eventually. The public confrontation happened on Monday, in full view of approximately 150 students, in the main corridor outside the Great Hall, and it was not something Harry planned. Dumbledore had sent a formal notice to all first years on Sunday evening, delivered by owl after dinner, brief and pleasant in tone, outlining new, precautionary guidelines for first-year students. The guidelines included restrictions on accessing non-curriculum areas of the castle outside of scheduled free periods, a requirement to have a prefect present when visiting any floor below the second, and, buried in the third paragraph with the language of administrative routine, a suspension of access to the dungeons and sub-dungeon areas for all first-year students pending a safety review of those spaces. The sub-dungeon areas. The chamber. Harry read the notice twice. Then he went to sleep. Monday morning he walked to breakfast along the main corridor and Dumbledore was there, which was unusual. Dumbledore did not generally walk the morning corridors, surrounded by the standard gravitational field of institutional authority and a small cluster of teachers, including McGonagall, who caught Harry's eyes as he approached and did something with hers that he interpreted as I didn't know about this in advance. Harry, Dumbledore said, warmly. Good morning. Good morning, Harry said. He kept walking. I trust you received the notice last evening. Harry stopped. He turned. The corridor was filling with students moving toward breakfast, the natural downstream of a school waking up, and several of them were already slowing, registering the specific quality of this conversation. I received it, Harry said. The safety review of the lower levels is purely precautionary, Dumbledore said, and his voice was doing its public thing, warm, considered, the voice of an authority figure whose authority is so established it doesn't need announcing. In light of recent events, it seems prudent. The chamber below the dungeons, Harry said, clearly enough to carry, is a Founder-era space that requires the heir of the Founder's Compact to access. The only person currently able to enter it is me. A safety review of that space is a restriction on my access to something I am specifically and uniquely qualified to enter, and that restriction requires, under the terms of the Founder's Compact, my consent. He paused. I don't consent. The corridor had gotten very quiet. Dumbledore looked at him with eyes that were doing something Harry had not seen them do before, something that was less warm than usual and more direct. Harry, he said, in the particular tone adults use when they are reminding a child of context with the implication that the context is final. The chamber has founders' books in it, Harry said. Books written specifically for the heir of the compact. Restricting access to those books is restricting my education, and my educational access at Hogwarts is protected by the same charter that establishes the compact in the first place. He looked at Dumbledore without performance, without drama, simply directly. I understand why you want to manage what I find down there. I understand it comes from concern, and I understand the concern has some basis. But I'm going to tell you plainly, here, now, I don't accept restriction on accessing information about my own situation. Not from the Ministry and not from you. The corridor was very quiet. About 60 students in the immediate vicinity, and the silence had spread in both directions as people stopped and turned to watch. McGonagall was doing something careful with her expression. Snape, at the far end of the corridor, had stopped walking and was watching with the particular stillness of someone who has decided to observe rather than intervene. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment. The warmth in his eyes hadn't gone exactly, it was doing something more complex, pressed against something else. There are things in that chamber, he said, quietly now, the public voice set aside, that could be dangerous. I know about the soul fragment in my scar, Harry said, equally quietly. Dumbledore went very still. I worked it out, Harry said. From the charm evidence and Hermione's notes and about 2 hours of reading material from the restricted section, which Flitwick authorized. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I'm not afraid of it. I'm not pretending it isn't there. And I'm not going to let you manage my access to information that helps me understand it because the information is difficult. The corridor breathed around them. Dumbledore said nothing for a moment. His expression was doing something Harry hadn't seen before and couldn't fully read, something in the territory between profound discomfort and genuine, grudging recognition. Then he said, the guidelines regarding the sub-dungeon areas are withdrawn. He said it evenly, to Harry, to the corridor, to no one specifically. I will revise the notice. A pause. The other precautionary guidelines stand. That's fine, Harry said. The other guidelines are reasonable. He turned and walked to breakfast. Behind him the corridor slowly, incrementally, resumed its normal motion, students moving again, conversations restarting, the general sound of a school morning reconstituting itself over the shape of what had just happened. He heard, behind him somewhere, a Gryffindor fifth year say something under their breath that sounded like bloody hell, in a tone that wasn't appalled. Ron was at the breakfast table already and looked up when Harry sat down. He took one look at Harry's face and said, "What happened?" Dumbledore tried to restrict access to the chamber, Harry said, serving himself porridge. I told him no. Ron stared. You told Dumbledore no? In the corridor. With people watching. It was the appropriate venue, Harry said. He just let you. He revised the guidelines, Harry said. In front of everyone. Ron processed this. Then, with the reverent tone of someone confronted by something beyond their existing framework, mate. Neville sat down across from them and looked between them and said, I heard something happened in the main corridor. Harry told Dumbledore no, Ron said. I know, Neville said. I was there. At the back. He was quiet for a moment, serving himself toast. Then, when you said you wouldn't accept restriction. Not from the Ministry and not from him. He looked at Harry. I thought about my gran. About all the times she's told me what I can't do because she's afraid of something going wrong. He was quiet again. I've been thinking about it all the way from the corridor. And? Harry said. And I think I've been accepting a lot of restrictions I didn't actually agree to, Neville said. With the steady clarity of someone arriving at a conclusion they've been approaching for a long time. I think I've been letting other people's fear work like a set of walls. Harry looked at him. Yes, he said. The herbology greenhouse, Neville said. Professor Sprout said there are upper-level plants in greenhouse 4 that first years aren't scheduled to work with until third year. She said it with this apology in her voice, like she felt bad about the rule. He paused. I'm going to ask her if I can go in there on my own time. She'll say yes, Harry said. Sprout will say yes. How do you know? Because she taught for 40 years because she loves the subject, Harry said. And people who love subjects like other people who love subjects. Walk in there like someone who belongs and she'll see it immediately. Neville absorbed this. Then he nodded, once, with the particular resolution of someone who has decided something and means it. Hermione arrived at the table with 3 books, sat down, and said, I heard about the corridor. Word travels fast, Ron said. I heard it from a 6th year in the library who heard it from a 5th year in the portrait corridor who apparently watched the whole thing. She looked at Harry. Was it necessary to do it publicly? Yes, Harry said. Because Dumbledore's institutional authority is partially dependent on it being unquestioned, Harry said. A private disagreement changes nothing. A public one establishes that the questioning is possible. He ate a spoonful of porridge. I didn't embarrass him. I disagreed with him clearly and he responded clearly. That's a normal interaction between 2 people. It only looks remarkable because it usually doesn't happen. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then, the notice revision will go out to all first years. Everyone will know the sub-dungeon restriction was withdrawn. Yes, Harry said. So everyone will know you can access something they can't, and that you pushed back on being restricted from it, and Dumbledore, revised his position. Yes. That changes things socially, she said. In the school. For you. Things were already changed, Harry said. The hat made sure of that. She looked at him for a moment with that focused, building a structure expression. Then, I found something in the Gryffindor book this morning. In the sections about the compact. She opened one of the 3 books she'd brought, turned to a marked page. The heir of the Founders' Compact isn't just a title. There's a function. The compact established that the heir would serve as, the text uses the word arbiter, which in context means something more than a judge. More like a corrective. She looked up. When Hogwarts's foundational purpose is compromised, when the institution diverges from what the founders built it to be, the heir has the authority to invoke the compact and compel correction. The breakfast table was loud around them. Plates and goblets and the social noise of 500 people eating. Harry sat in the middle of it and read the passage she was pointing to. That's significant, he said. The founders built a failsafe into Hogwarts, Hermione said, and her voice was careful, the voice she used when something excited her enough that she was actively managing the excitement. Against the school being used as something other than what they intended it to be. Against it becoming a tool of the wrong people's priorities. She paused. And the failsafe is you. The fire in the great hall crackled. The enchanted ceiling shifted from grey morning to something brighter, September sun finding its way through the magic overhead. Harry read the passage again. Then he closed the book and looked at the hall, all of it, the 4 long tables, the teachers at the front, the portraits and the candles and the old stone, and let himself feel what the chamber had been trying to tell him since he first pressed his palm to the wall. The castle knew him. Not because he was famous. Not because a hat had screamed his name into the void. Because he was what the founders had been waiting to build the place for. All right, he said. All right? Ron said. All right, it's significant. All right, we'll deal with it. He finished his porridge. But for now I have charms in 20 minutes and Flitwick wants to work on precision casting this week and I haven't read the assigned chapter. I've read it, Hermione said immediately. I know, Harry said. Tell me the 3 most important parts on the way to class. She was already talking before they'd stood up. That evening, Harry went back to the chamber alone. He sat in the center of the room with the 4 books around him, not reading, just sitting, and he let the old magic do what it did when he was there: pulse, recognize, make room. He thought about everything the day had held. Vance and her investment in a future conversation. Dumbledore and his complicated care and his willingness to revise, however reluctantly. Snape and his involuntary window and his careful, specific compliment. He thought about Neville deciding to walk into Greenhouse 4. He thought about the compact and its function and the word arbiter, which meant not judge but corrective, which meant not punishment but restoration, which meant something much harder and more interesting than power. He thought about his mother. About Hufflepuff's framework. About the connection that had produced the magic that deflected a killing curse, and the fragment that had arrived in the same moment, opposite in nature, carried in the same scar. Two things in one place. Both real. Both requiring attention. Neither one defining the other. He sat in the chamber and breathed and thought, I am 11 years old and I am carrying things that should not fit in one person, and it was not a complaint, just an observation, the kind you make when you're taking accurate stock. And then he thought, but then, nothing about me was ever meant to fit a standard container. He stood up. He looked at the blank fifth alcove wall, the ghost of an uncarved space. Not yet. But the story of what went in it was already beginning to write itself, in the corridors and classrooms and chambers of Hogwarts, one day at a time. He left the chamber and went back to his dormitory and slept, and this time he slept without complications, straight and deep and with the particular completeness of someone who has, for today, done what they came here to do. Chapter 5, 52 Truths. October arrived and changed the light. The Scottish hills went amber and rust and a kind of deep red that looks painted rather than grown, and the sky over Hogwarts shifted from summer blue to something older and more serious, the kind of sky that means business. The lake turned the color of pewter. The owls came earlier in the evening. The castle absorbed all of this and became, somehow, more itself, as though autumn was its natural season, as though it had been designed for grey mornings and wood smoke and the particular quality of cold that makes stone buildings feel alive rather than merely old. Harry noticed all of it and said nothing about it to anyone except Luna, who said in return that October was the month when Hogwarts remembered what it was built for, which Harry thought was the best description of autumn he'd ever heard. The week since the corridor confrontation had produced a specific new atmosphere around Harry that was different from the gawking and whispering of the first days. That early attention had been formless, the fascination with a famous name, the novelty of someone unusual. What replaced it was something with more structure. Students didn't stare at him in the corridor anymore. Some of them nodded. Several of the older ones had made points of introducing themselves that were clearly not casual, a fourth-year Hufflepuff named Zacharias who pressed a book on magical genealogy into his hands with a look of intense meaning, a Ravenclaw sixth-year called Clearwater who'd handed him a folded note that turned out to be a summary of the Founder's Compact that was entirely accurate and better organized than his own notes, with no name attached. People were paying attention. People were deciding things about him, forming positions, and most of the positions were not hostile. Some were better than that. Some were people watching a thing they'd been waiting for without knowing they were waiting for it, and recognizing it now that it had arrived. The hostile positions also existed. He was realistic about that. The charm started in mid-October. Not the 52 from the sorting, those had been a single event, a release, not a condition. This was something different. The revelation charms, in burning through the castle on September 1st, had done something to the old magic in the walls. Hufflepuff's book had a term for it, awakening. The foundational magic of Hogwarts was alive in the sense that very old, very powerful enchantments are alive, not conscious, but responsive, sensitive to conditions in the way a sleeping organism is sensitive to temperature or sound. The 52 charms had been enough stimulus. The castle had begun to wake up. The first manifestation Harry noticed was the portraits. They'd always been active, painted figures moving between frames, conducting their painted business with the comfortable arbitrariness of things that have existed long enough to have developed genuine personality. But from mid-October they began doing something different around Harry. Not following him exactly. More like orienting toward him the way plants orient toward light, subtly, continuously, maintaining a general awareness of his position in the building that was distinct from how they treated anyone else. The second was the staircases. Hogwarts's moving staircases were notorious and generally chaotic, shifting on their own schedule with complete indifference to where students wanted to go. For Harry they didn't shift. Or rather, they shifted in ways that were consistently useful to him, which he noticed on the third occasion it happened and verified on the fourth and fifth by testing it deliberately, walking toward a staircase he knew should be moving and watching it pause. "The castle is responding to you," Hermione said, when he told her. They were in the chamber, a Tuesday evening, her notes spread across the stone floor in her precise organizational system. "It's not mechanical. It's aware of you. The awakening magic is recognizing the air signature." "What's the range?" Harry said. "What do you mean? How much of the castle?" "All of it." "Specific areas?" She thought about it. "The foundational enchantments run through the entire structure. But the awakening would logically progress from the oldest sections outward." She looked at the walls around them. "Starting here. And it'll keep developing," Harry said. "As you spend more time here. As the compact magic consolidates, I suppose." "Yes." She looked up at him. "Harry, do you understand what this means practically? The castle responding to you isn't decorative. The founders built active defensive enchantments into the building that can be operated by the air. We've only found references to 2 of them so far, but the implication is that there are more," Harry said. "Many more. Godric's book has a chapter on what he called the living defenses that I can't fully read because it's in a cipher that requires access to all 4 books simultaneously and I only have full access to one." She said this with the frustration of someone who genuinely suffers at the border of available information. But the description in the opening of that chapter, she looked at her notes. "He calls them the castle's own will expressed in stone and old word, which poetically translates to something like autonomous magical defense that responds to the air's intention." Harry looked at the walls. At the stone that had opened for him the first morning, without a spell, without an incantation, just his hand and his presence and his being what he was. "Right," he said. "Right," she echoed, in the tone she used when right meant something large. The third and most disruptive manifestation arrived on a Thursday afternoon in the middle of October, when Harry was walking to herbology and passed the trophy room on the 3rd floor and the trophy room's door swung open of its own accord. He stopped. Looked at the open door. Looked at the trophy room, which was full of polished cases and glinting awards and the general institutional self-satisfaction of a school displaying its own excellence. He went in. There was one case he couldn't have explained why he walked to, second from the left on the far wall, containing a small collection of special awards for services to the school. He looked at the awards without particular expectation and found himself looking at a shield, aged silver, awarded in 1943 to one T.M. Riddle for services to the school involving the capture of the individual responsible for the opening of the Chamber of Secrets. He stood very still. T.M. Riddle. Tom Riddle. The same initials on the diary he'd seen mentioned in Hermione's notes about Slytherin's bloodline, a cross-reference from something she'd found in a genealogy index. The Chamber of Secrets. He'd read about the chamber in his first week. It was in Hogwarts, a history, briefly, because Hogwarts, a history was comprehensive but not always brave about the uncomfortable parts. A legendary chamber supposedly built by Salazar Slytherin, containing something called the heir of Slytherin's monster, opened apparently twice in the school's history, once in 1943, when a student died, and once, the book's language became very careful here, in an incident of disputed nature more recently. The trophy said 1943. T.M. Riddle. Tom Marvolo Riddle. Harry looked at the trophy for a long time. The castle had shown him this room. Had opened the door at the exact moment he was passing. Had led him to this case the way it led him to staircases that were useful. The castle's own will expressed in stone and old word. "Thank you," he said, quietly, to the room, to the stone, to whatever had decided this was what he needed to see today. He went to herbology 14 minutes late and accepted Professor Sprout's mild reproach without explanation, because some things didn't need explaining yet. Neville, beside him in the greenhouse, had dirt on his forehead and was handling a mandrake with the easy competence of someone who'd been doing this for years. Sprout had indeed said yes to the greenhouse 4 request, immediately and with the warm enthusiasm of someone delighted to have been asked, and Neville had been spending every free period in there since. "You all right?" Neville said, quiet under the noise of 20 students learning to handle temperamental plants. "Fine," Harry said. "Better than fine. I found something." "Good something or complicated something?" Harry thought about TM. Riddle and the chamber beneath the chamber and the fragment in his scar and the trophy in its case. "Both," he said. Neville nodded. "Usually is," he said, and went back to his mandrake with the serenity of someone who has accepted complexity as a condition of interesting things. The 50-second truth arrived on a Friday night, and it nearly killed someone, which clarified several things that had been building toward a clarification. Quidditch season had started. Harry had not tried out for the house team, he was a first year, and while the prohibition on first years having their own brooms was something he intended to address through legitimate channels before second year, there was no urgent need to accelerate that specific timeline. He played chess with Ron in the evenings, which was a consistent and humbling experience because Ron played chess the way Harry imagined generals operated in the field, not reactively, from several moves away, restructuring the entire board's logic before making each piece move. "You're brutal at this," Harry told him, watching his knight be obliterated. "I've had a lot of practice," Ron said. 6 siblings. You play chess when it's raining or when someone's borrowed your broom. It rains a lot in Devon. "I'll get better," Harry said. "Probably," Ron agreed generously. "You've got the right instincts. You just don't think far enough ahead yet. You solve the immediate problem instead of the problem 3 problems from now." "I'm working on that," Harry said. Ron looked at him. "This is the first time you've admitted to working on anything," he said. "Usually you just do it." "I'm usually working on it while I do it," Harry said. "I just don't narrate the working." They played for another hour and Harry lost 2 more games and won 1, which felt genuinely earned, and Ron said, "There it is," with the satisfaction of someone watching a student have a breakthrough, which Harry found both amusing and sincere. The night went wrong at 11:15. Harry was awake, he frequently was, his body had decided that 5 hours was sufficient and nothing was going to change that, lying in his bed and running through the TM Riddle information in his head, cross-referencing it with Slytherin's book and the genealogy Hermione had been building, when the castle changed. It was the only way he could describe it. The building changed, the old magic he'd been aware of since the first morning, the pulse beneath the stone, shifted in quality abruptly and completely, the way temperature in a room changes when a door to the outside is opened. Something was wrong somewhere in the building. He knew it with the certainty of direct information rather than inference, the way you know your own heartbeat has changed. He was out of bed and dressed before he'd consciously decided to move. Down the dormitory stairs, through the common room, out the portrait hole before the fat lady had fully registered him leaving, she called something after him in her sleep-muzzy voice but he was already in the corridor, already moving, following the castle's pull the way you follow the pull of a place you know well in the dark, by feel rather than sight. The pull led down. 2nd floor corridor, then first, then the ground floor and then not the dungeons, not toward the stones corridor, which was his first thought, but toward the library wing. East corridor. A service passage off the east corridor that the castle had shown him once in his early exploration and that he'd filed, narrow, stone, leading to a locked classroom on the library's ground floor that was used for storage and wasn't on any timetable. The door was open. Harry went through and found Draco Malfoy unconscious on the floor. He checked breathing first, present, steady. Pulse, normal. No visible injury. He crouched beside Malfoy and looked at him and then looked at the room, a storage classroom, yes, but something had happened in it. Books displaced from a shelf, one of them still open on the floor with its pages splayed. A set of overlapping marks on the stone floor that were the residual signature of spell discharge, multiple spells, recent, within the last 10 minutes. And there, in the doorway to the small adjoining storage space at the back of the classroom, a smell. Faint, wrong. The specific wrong smell of magic that was old and foreign and had no business being in a first-year's vicinity. Harry stood up. He moved to the doorway. The adjoining room was empty. Whatever had been there, and something had been, the smell was the proof of it, the same quality of contamination the 49th charm had pressed against and recoiled from, was gone. Left recently. Through the room's only window, which was open, 3rd floor height onto the castle grounds. He went back to Malfoy. Malfoy was coming around, which was good, his eyes were opening, unfocused, gradually finding the ceiling. Harry crouched beside him again and waited. When Malfoy's eyes found him they went through several expressions rapidly: confusion, wariness, the particular wariness of a Slytherin waking up vulnerable in front of someone he'd been performing superiority at for 2 months. "You're fine," Harry said. "No injuries." "Stunned, I think. Whatever hit you wasn't dark magic, just forceful." Malfoy sat up with effort and pressed his back against the nearest shelf. "I don't need, I know," Harry said. "I'm not helping you. I'm informing you of your physical status. You can do whatever you want with the information." Malfoy stared at him. The architecture companions were nowhere. "How did you find? The castle told me something was wrong," Harry said simply. "What were you doing here?" Malfoy's jaw worked. He was doing a rapid private calculation, Harry could see it, weighing the embarrassment of the position against something else. "I was following someone," he said, finally. "Who?" "I don't know." And this was genuine, the uncertainty of it was real, nothing performative in it. "I saw someone in the upper corridor after curfew. The way they moved, I thought it was a student. I followed." He paused. "It wasn't a student." "What was it?" "I don't know what it was," Malfoy said, and the repetition of "I don't know" from Draco Malfoy had a specific weight to it, the weight of someone for whom not knowing is an unfamiliar and uncomfortable state. "It walked like a person until it didn't. And when I got close it turned and there was something wrong with its face. And then I woke up on the floor." Harry looked at the window. At the open sky beyond it, Scottish dark and windy. "Its face," Harry said. "What was wrong with it?" Malfoy looked at him. Something moved behind his eyes. "It looked like it was being used," he said. Like a puppet wearing a person. Like the thing inside it didn't quite fit." Harry thought about a soul fragment that couldn't find a stable host. About contamination. About a man who had failed to die completely and was doing what incomplete things do, finding temporary lodgings, moving through the shadows of places that had significance to him, looking for something specific. Looking for the Philosopher's Stone. "Can you walk?" Harry said. "Obviously," Malfoy said, and stood up immediately to prove it, slightly too fast, and caught himself against the shelf without acknowledgement. "Don't follow strange things through the castle at night," Harry said. "I didn't ask, you didn't ask for advice," Harry said. "That's also information. Use it or don't." He moved toward the door. Then he stopped and said, "Malfoy. You could have been seriously hurt. Whatever it was real and it was in this school and it's gone now but it'll come back." He looked at him directly. "Watch yourself." He left before Malfoy could respond. He walked the corridors back toward Gryffindor Tower and he thought about the puppet wearing a person that Malfoy had described, and the smell of contamination in the adjoining room, and what it meant that something was circling the school at night looking for a path to the stone. He thought about what Dumbledore had said. "The stone is yours to handle." He'd meant it as a separation of problems, a division of responsibilities. He'd meant it reasonably. But Voldemort, the fragment of him, the piece still operational, had just stunned a student. Had been inside the castle. Had been 15 feet from a 12-year-old boy who'd followed it out of pure Slytherin impulse and no sense of self-preservation whatsoever. Problems had a way of refusing to remain separated. He told Hermione in the morning, privately, before Ron was down. She listened with the total focused stillness she brought to serious information and then said, "Quirrell." Harry looked at her. "Professor Quirrell," she said. "He started this year. No one at Hogwarts knew him before this September. He wears a turban. He smells strange. I noticed on the first day. I thought it was a personal quirk, but the smell is," she paused. "It's the same quality you're describing." "Wrong. Foreign." Harry thought about Quirrell's defense against the dark arts lessons, competent but with a specific quality of misdirection in them, a tendency to circle the actual point rather than address it directly. He thought about the way Quirrell moved through the school, the stammer, the general effect of a nervous man, which he'd registered and dismissed as personality. "He teaches defense," Harry said. "He would know the school's defensive structures," Hermione said. "He was at Gringotts in July, presumably," Harry said. "The attempted break-in. He either was the break-in or he knows who was. And now he's inside the school," Hermione said. "With access to every student and every corridor and the fifth-floor room where the stone is." She looked at him steadily. "Dumbledore has to know." "Dumbledore knows Quirrell," Harry said. "He hired him." "Dumbledore hired him before the stone arrived," Hermione said. "Or he didn't know what Quirrell was when he hired him." Or, she stopped. "Or he knows now and is managing it," Harry said. They sat with that for a moment. "The stone is already protected," Harry said. "Multiple enchantments, we know that from the rumor trail. Dumbledore's protections plus contributions from other teachers. Quirrell can't just walk in." "He stunned Malfoy," Hermione said. "He stunned Malfoy," Harry agreed. "He can use offensive magic. He's not just a passenger in Quirrell's body, he's operating through him." He paused. "Which means he's stronger than expected for a fragment. Which means he's been finding ways to consolidate. Which means, he needs to be stopped before he gets stronger," Hermione said. "He needs to be contained," Harry said. "By someone with the authority and the capability to do it properly." He looked at her. "That's Dumbledore." "So we tell Dumbledore." "We tell Dumbledore," Harry said. "Everything. What happened to Malfoy. What I found in the classroom. The smell." He paused. "And we tell him directly that we know it's Quirrell." Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then, "He won't like that we worked it out." "He doesn't have to like it," Harry said. "He has to deal with it." They went to Dumbledore's office that morning, the two of them, and Harry told it straight and clean with no preamble and no performance, what he'd felt in the dormitory, what he'd found in the classroom, what Malfoy had described, and what Hermione had identified about Quirrell. Dumbledore listened to all of it without interrupting, and when Harry was finished he was very quiet for a moment in the particular way he was quiet when he was processing something that had arrived faster than expected. "Draco Malfoy is unhurt," he said finally. "Physically, yes," Harry said. "And he knows that something not quite human was in the castle," Harry said. "He doesn't have our conclusions about who it was." Another pause. "You are certain it was Quirinus," Dumbledore said. "Hermione is 90% certain," Harry said. "I'd put it at 85. But 90 or 85 is enough to act on." Dumbledore looked at Hermione. She met his gaze with the steady, evidence-based composure of someone who has done the work and trusts it. He looked back at Harry. "I have been aware," Dumbledore said slowly, "that Professor Quirrell's situation was more complicated than his application suggested. I had not yet established the full extent of it. I had been monitoring." A pause. "I had not anticipated that he would act against a student." "He's getting bolder," Harry said. "He's been at this since July." Whatever he has access to through Quirrell, whatever resources that fragment has, they're building. He is limited by Quirrell's physical capability, Dumbledore said. The nature of his current situation requires a host, and that host has significant constraints. He cannot simply, he stunned a 12-year-old last night, Harry said. Not harshly. Just the fact. The stone needs to be moved or the protections need to be substantially reinforced, and Quirrell needs to be removed from access to both the students and the fifth floor. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment. You are suggesting I dismiss a teacher, he said. Based on evidence gathered by 2 first-year students. I'm suggesting you protect your school, Harry said. From a known threat. Using whatever evidence is available. He paused. The compact gives the heir standing to request the headmaster take protective action when Hogwarts's foundational purpose, the safe education of students, is compromised. That's what I'm doing. Formally, if it helps. Hermione made a small, quick sound beside him that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent to one. Dumbledore looked between them. Something in his expression shifted, moved, found a new position. The compact invocation, he said. You've researched the formal process. Hermione has, Harry said. Of course she has, Dumbledore said, and here, surprising Harry, he smiled, a real one, not the warm management expression, something quieter and less performed. Very well. I will address the situation with Professor Quirrell. The stone will receive additional protection. I would ask, he paused carefully, that you allow me to manage this without direct involvement from either of you. Define involvement, Harry said. No visiting the 5th floor corridor. We weren't planning to, Harry said. No confronting Quirrell directly. Agreed, Harry said. He can stun people. He's not someone first years should be engaging. And, Dumbledore hesitated. If you feel the castle alerting you to danger again, as it did last night, come to me first. Not investigate first. Harry looked at him. That depends on whether someone's life is at risk. Dumbledore held his gaze. Then, yes, he said. I suppose it does. They left the office and walked down the corridor and Hermione said, when they were far enough from the gargoyle, he's going to handle Quirrell. He will, Harry said. It's a direct threat to a student. He can't rationalize leaving it. You invoked the compact. I invoked the compact, Harry said. Formally, she said. For the first time. You used it as a legal instrument. She looked at him sideways. How does that feel? Harry thought about it. Like something that was theoretical became real, he said. Like a word you've only read on paper and then finally say out loud and it sounds the way words are supposed to sound. She was quiet for a moment. I've been reading ahead in the Gryffindor book, she said. The compact invocation isn't one-directional. When the heir invokes it formally, the castle records it. It becomes part of the foundational record. So Hogwarts knows, Harry said. Hogwarts knows, she said. Every invocation from here forward is part of the structure. Part of what the building is. She paused. You're not just studying here, Harry. You're authoring something. He thought about the blank fifth alcove wall. About the book he was supposed to write eventually. Slowly, he said. Obviously slowly, she said. You're 11. You're going to stop saying that like it's relevant soon, he said. Probably around third year, she said, and smiled, and they walked to breakfast. Quirrell was absent from his classes the following Monday. By Tuesday the school had produced a dozen competing rumors about why, ranging from illness to a family emergency to, and this came from the Slytherin end of the rumor mill with the specific quality of speculation based on fragments of observed truth, something involving the headmaster and a private conversation that had not gone well for one of the participants. Professor Flitwick taught defense for the rest of the week, without explaining why, with the brisk efficiency of someone doing a necessary job and not inviting questions about it. He did it well, which surprised no one who'd been paying attention to how Flitwick taught. The charms curriculum and the defense curriculum overlapped more than their separate designations implied, and Flitwick was 3 decades into understanding that overlap. Harry stayed after Flitwick's Wednesday charms class. "Mr. Potter," Flitwick said, looking up from his desk with the alert, unsurprised expression he'd been wearing around Harry since September. "The cipher in Godric Gryffindor's book," Harry said. "The one that requires all 4 house access simultaneously to read. How would you approach solving it?" Flitwick set down his quill. He looked at Harry with the full, focused attention he brought to questions that genuinely interested him. "You found the chapter on the living defenses." "I found the chapter," Harry said. "I can't read most of it." "No," Flitwick said. "You could read part of it. Sections accessible to your Gryffindor resonance. The parts requiring Ravenclaw logic, Slytherin strategic pattern recognition, and Hufflepuff relational mapping." He paused, and something moved in his expression that was very close to scholarly delight barely kept in check. "Those require the simultaneous operation of all 4 resonances. Which in practice means, more than one person," Harry said. "Each carrying their house's magic." Flitwick looked at him. "It means," he said carefully, 4 people in the chamber simultaneously, each engaging their respective book, working toward the shared cipher. The magic would function as a key requiring all 4 tumbler positions at once." He paused. "It is, theoretically, the most sophisticated magical lock I have encountered in 42 years of professional engagement with magic." "I have a Gryffindor and a Ravenclaw," Harry said. "I need a Hufflepuff and a Slytherin." "You also need people you trust absolutely," Flitwick said. "The cipher's function requires full, unguarded magical engagement. You cannot engage it partly. You cannot have reservations." Harry thought about that. About Helga Hufflepuff's framework. The most powerful magic requires genuine and unguarded connection. "I know," Harry said. Flitwick looked at him for a long moment. "Who are you thinking for Hufflepuff?" he said. "I don't know yet," Harry said honestly. "I'll know when I meet them." "And Slytherin?" Flitwick said, and his voice was doing something careful and neutral that was working hard to stay that way. Harry thought about Draco Malfoy in a classroom on the floor, coming to consciousness with the specific vulnerability of someone whose carefully constructed exterior had been temporarily unavailable. About the genuine question under all the performance. About the boy who'd followed something dangerous through the castle at night because Slytherin instinct said pursue the thing you don't understand. "I have a candidate," Harry said. Flitwick looked at him for another long moment. Then, 10 points to Gryffindor, he said, for thinking 3 problems ahead. Harry smiled. "I had good advice," he said. He found Malfoy in the library on Thursday evening, which was not where he'd have predicted finding Draco Malfoy but which on reflection made complete sense. Malfoy was intelligent, actually and genuinely intelligent rather than the performance intelligence of someone who wants to appear impressive, and intelligent people went to libraries when they needed to understand something. Malfoy was reading something Harry couldn't see the title of and he didn't look up when Harry sat across from him, but his jaw tightened by a fraction, the specific microtension of someone who has registered an arrival and is deciding how to respond to it. "Slytherin's book," Harry said. Malfoy looked up. "What?" "In the chamber below the dungeons. There are 4 founders' books. 1 for each house. Slytherin's was written for someone who needed to understand the difference between what they were told they want and what they actually want." Harry looked at him across the library table, level and direct. "It's relevant to your current situation." Malfoy stared at him. "My current situation," he repeated. "You followed something that scared you through the castle at night," Harry said. "Because you needed to understand it. That's not a Slytherin being reckless. That's a Slytherin's actual instinct, pursue knowledge even when it's uncomfortable. Even when the knowledge threatens the framework you've been given." The library was quiet around them. Evening light through the high windows. The faint sound of Madame Pants shelving things in the next row with her proprietary efficiency. The chamber requires Slytherin magic, Harry said. Among others. I need someone who carries it, not the name, the actual resonance. He paused. I think that's you. Malfoy looked at him for a long, genuinely unpredictable moment. His face was doing several things, the performance and the thing under the performance and the thing under that, all visible in the specific way things are visible when someone is too tired or too shaken to manage all the layers simultaneously. My father, Malfoy said, would call this a trap. Your father, Harry said, isn't here. Another long pause. What does the book say? Malfoy said. Slytherin's book. The first page. Harry told him, word for word, because he remembered everything he read. And he watched Malfoy's face as the words arrived, watched the architecture of the practiced expression develop a crack that went, this time, all the way through. Malfoy looked down at the table. He was quiet for a long time. When he looked back up his face had settled into something that was neither the easy performance nor the desperate uncertainty underneath it, something in between, rawer, more honest, and more his. When, he said. I'll let you know, Harry said. We need a fourth still. A Hufflepuff. Yes. Malfoy's expression moved through something complicated. Hannah Abbott, he said, surprising Harry. Second-year Hufflepuff. She was in the corridor during the sorting, she was standing near the back of the first years and when the 48th charm came through, the one about identity, she was the only person in the first years who looked settled afterward instead of rattled. Like it confirmed something rather than disturbed something. He paused. I noticed. Harry looked at him. You noticed which charm was which while it was happening. I was paying attention, Malfoy said, with a flicker of the old manner, briefly, like a reflex. She's a second year, Harry said. The room responds to house resonance, not year, Malfoy said. You said the cipher requires someone carrying Hufflepuff magic who is fully themselves. That's a quality not a grade level. Harry looked at him for a moment. Then he said, all right. Malfoy nodded. He picked up his book. Then, without looking up, with the careful precision of someone placing something down rather than throwing it, thank you. For the classroom. For not, he stopped. For handling it the way you did. You'd have done the same, Harry said. Malfoy looked up at that. His expression was sharp and surprised and something else. You would, Harry said. You're not who your father says you are. He stood up and left Malfoy with that and with Slytherin's first page printed in his memory, and he walked back through the library thinking about the 5 alcoves and the cipher and the 4 tumbler positions and the book he was supposed to write and everything that was moving toward everything else with the gathering momentum of things that were always going to arrive at this point, had been aimed at this point from the beginning of a very specific story. Outside, the October dark had settled over the castle. The hills were black silhouettes under a clear sky and the stars were doing what stars do over Scotland in autumn, which is being there so completely and abundantly that pretending they aren't feels genuinely rude. The castle breathed around him, stone and old magic and centuries of accumulated living, and Harry walked through it feeling the pulse of it under his feet and thinking about everything it had been patiently holding for a very long time, waiting for someone to arrive who could hold it back. I'm here, he thought. Not for the first time. But this time it felt less like an arrival and more like a beginning. Chapter 6, The Hat Was Right. November came in like a verdict. The first frost coated the castle grounds in white by the second week, and the lake went from pewter to iron, and the mountains in the distance became permanent fixtures of grey and white permanence that made the castle look like it had always been exactly where it was and always would be. The kind of weather that strips everything to essentials. Cold air, bare branches, the particular clarity of a world that has stopped pretending to be comfortable. Harry found he liked it. The weeks following the Quirrell situation had been busy in the way that only becomes clear in retrospect, not dramatic, not punctuated by obvious crisis, just dense with movement and development and the accumulation of things that were building towards something without announcing it. Quirrell had not returned. A new defense teacher, a retired Auror named Tonks, mother of someone apparently in a few years above them, practical and direct and excellent at the actual subject, had arrived by the third week of October and immediately made defense feel like a class about surviving real things rather than performing knowledge of theoretical ones. The stone, Dumbledore had told Harry in a brief morning meeting, had been moved. He hadn't said where. Harry hadn't asked, because he genuinely didn't need to know, and knowing would only make him responsible for information he had no good use for. The fragment of Voldemort that had been wearing Quirrell like a bad suit was gone from the castle. Harry felt the quality of the old magic confirmed this the morning after Quirrell left, the contamination smell absent from the corridors, the castle's pulse settling into something cleaner. One problem, managed. The others were still in progress. He'd met Hannah Abbott on a Thursday in late October, arranged through Luna, who knew her from some extracurricular connection that Luna described only as an interest in things that grow in the dark, which Harry had decided not to examine too closely. Hannah was a second year with a round, open face and the specific quality of steadiness that Malfoy had been right about. She was fully, comfortably herself in a way that had nothing to do with confidence in the performative sense and everything to do with having no particular interest in being anyone else. She was warm without being soft, practical without being cold, and when Harry explained the chamber and the cipher and what was needed, she listened with her hands in her lap and then said, "When do we go?" "You're not curious about the details?" Hermione said, from beside Harry. "I'm curious," Hannah said. "I'll be more curious when I'm in the room." She paused. "My gran always said curiosity goes where it's fed. There's no point theorizing about a thing I haven't seen yet." Hermione looked at Harry. Harry looked at Hannah. "Saturday morning," he said. 5 o'clock. "I'll be there," she said, and that was that. The five of them went down on a Saturday in early November: Harry, Hermione, Luna, Malfoy, and Hannah. 5 in the morning, the castle empty and breathing in its pre-dawn way. Harry led them through the familiar route, the last staircase landing, the wall, and put his hand on the stone and felt it recognize him and open, the same smooth inward sweep as always. Malfoy stopped at the threshold. Not from fear. Harry watched him, and it wasn't fear, it was something more like the pause before a significant step, the acknowledgement that crossing a threshold changes something. His jaw was set and his eyes were doing their newly honest thing, the one he'd started doing since the library conversation: less performance and more presence. He crossed the threshold. The chamber received them all. The 4 alcoves lit up, not dramatically, not with staged magical illumination, but in the way embers glow when given air, warmth rather than spectacle, each alcove finding its corresponding person and doing something quiet and specific. The Gryffindor alcove when Hermione neared it. The Ravenclaw when Luna settled against it with her magazine tucked under her arm. The Hufflepuff when Hannah walked toward it with the easy direction of someone following a sound they can already hear. The Slytherin when Malfoy stood before it. He stood very still for a moment, looking at the carved symbol above the alcove, the locket, and his expression did something Harry decided not to look at directly because it was private, whatever it was, and Malfoy had been private enough to earn the moment. Harry stood in the center by the stone table. The 4 books arranged themselves, not physically, they were already arranged, but they settled into a different quality of presence, became active rather than resting. He picked up Hufflepuff's book and felt the familiar warmth of it, and then felt, new, the beginning of something larger, the books responding to the other presences in the room, to the 4 resonances, to the conditions of their completion. "What do we do?" Ron said, from behind Harry. "Slight problem." "Ron," Harry said. "What?" Ron looked at the alcoves and the books and the glowing walls. "I know I'm Gryffindor, but that's Hermione's thing, I get that, I came, I'm here." "Sit by the door," Harry said. "I need someone watching the stairs." Ron looked at him. Then he said, "Right," with complete sincerity, and sat at the bottom of the staircase with the reliable ease of someone who knows exactly what they're good at and is fine with it. Hermione had opened the Gryffindor book. Luna had the Ravenclaw book open in her lap and was looking at it with the specific expression she wore when something was arranging itself in her mind in interesting ways. Hannah held the Hufflepuff book with both hands and her eyes were closed. Malfoy stood with his hand resting on the Slytherin book's cover without opening it. He was looking at Harry. "There's a passage in it," he said. "From the first time I read the first page in the library in my head, from what you told me. And I've been thinking about it and he stopped. His jaw moved. "I need to know before we do this. The book says the difference between what you're told you want and what you actually want." He looked at Harry steadily. "My father wants me to believe certain things about certain people. About what they are and what they deserve. I was raised on it." A pause. "What the charm showed me, what Slytherin actually built this house to do, is that true? That it's about understanding systems, not," he paused. "Not what I was told." "Read the book," Harry said. "You'll know when you have." Malfoy looked at him. Then he opened the book. Something in the room shifted. Not dramatically. Not the way the sorting had shifted, that had been an explosion, enormous and ungovernable and final. This was more like the moment when four separate instruments find the same note and produce, together, a chord that none of them could produce alone. The four books opened to the cipher chapter simultaneously, all four, and the cipher on the pages moved. The marks that had been inert and scrambled under Harry's single-house reading became readable, briefly, in flashes, like a code key turning in a lock. Harry read quickly, because briefly was all they were going to get. The living defenses of Hogwarts were not defensive spells. They were something older than spells, embedded in the founding enchantments the way the castle's magic was embedded in its stone, architectural, ambient, operated not by casting but by intention, by the air expressing a need and the building answering it. The cipher described 7 specific defenses, the last of which made Harry go very still. The 7th defense, the cipher read, is the greatest and the last resort. It is the binding of the air's own nature, all 4 houses, held in one, against the thing that is most fundamentally opposed to what Hogwarts is, the reduction of human souls. The heir who has been made to carry a fragment of a divided soul carries also the key to that fragment's destruction. Not through conquest. Through completion. The divided thing cannot survive contact with the undivided. What has been whole cannot be split by what was never whole to begin with. The fragment in the air is not contamination, it is a seed planted in the wrong soil, and the soil will eventually reclaim it. Harry read it twice. 3 times. The cipher was already fading, the books settling back into their resting state, the cord dissolving. He stood with the information and let it be what it was. Not a death sentence. Not a weapon pointed at him. A fact, like all the other facts. The binding had been cracking because what was underneath it was incompatible with being contained, and what was in his scar was incompatible with being in him, and the incompatibility moved only one direction. He was undivided. The fragment of Voldemort in his scar had been placed in the worst possible host for it, not the most powerful host or the most dangerous, but the most whole. The hat had said, "The container is cracking." It hadn't meant Harry's container. It had meant the fragments. He set Hufflepuff's book down on the table and looked at the blank 5th alcove wall. "Harry," Hermione said. Her voice was careful. "I'm fine," he said. "I understand something now that I didn't before." "The cipher," she said. "What did it?" "Everything's fine," he said, and meant it, completely. "Better than fine. I need to talk to Dumbledore." He went to Dumbledore's office alone, immediately, without stopping. The gargoyle moved before he touched it. Fawkes, when Harry entered, sang the opening of a full song, not just the single note he'd offered on previous visits, and the sound of it filled the room like warmth fills a cold space, steady and absolute. Dumbledore was awake, which Harry had expected because Dumbledore appeared to sleep approximately never. He was at his desk with several open books and a half-eaten bowl of something, and he looked up when Harry entered with the expression of a man who has been waiting for a specific conversation without knowing exactly when it was going to arrive. "Sit down," Dumbledore said. "I'll stand," Harry said. "I need to tell you something and then ask you something and then tell you something else." A pause. "Very well. The cipher in the Founder's books," Harry said. "The seventh defense. The fragment in my scar isn't destroying me from the inside. It's the opposite. My nature is incompatible with a divided soul. The fragment is deteriorating." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "You knew this." Dumbledore was very still. "Not the mechanism," Harry said. "Not the cipher's specific language. But you knew the fragment wouldn't survive long-term inside me. That's part of why you maintained the binding, not just to protect me from the outside world, but to slow the process down. To control when it happened." He watched Dumbledore's face, the careful neutrality of it, the thing working behind it. Because if the fragment deteriorates on its own timeline, there's no guarantee that what it contains, whatever remains of Voldemort, goes safely. There's a risk of it seeking a new anchor. Dumbledore said nothing. But nothing, from him, was confirmation. "What did the 50th charm show you?" Harry said. A very long pause. Fawkes sang softly on his perch. "It showed," Dumbledore said, slowly, "the projected timeline of the fragment's natural decay. And the risk. If it fragments within you rather than being removed cleanly." He paused. "It would have shown all of this in the Great Hall at the sorting, to everyone present, and you were 11 years old and had just arrived and, you sealed it," Harry said. "I understand why." "Harry, I understand why," Harry said again, meaning it, firmly. That specific decision, in that specific moment, was defensible. "I want you to know that I understand it and I'm not here to relitigate it." Dumbledore looked at him with the eyes that had been watching him since the first evening, and in them now was something that had given up the management quality entirely. Something that was simply respect, and underneath it, carefully held, something much larger that Harry thought was guilt and grief and relief all pressing against each other with nowhere to go. "The question," Harry said, "is how we remove it cleanly. Before it deteriorates on its own and creates a worse problem." "I have been," Dumbledore said quietly, "researching that question for 10 years. And I believe I have found an answer." He stood. He moved to the cabinet beside his desk, the one full of silver instruments, and opened it and withdrew something Harry hadn't noticed before among the spinning and breathing things, a small stone basin, wide and shallow, filled with something that moved like liquid but wasn't quite liquid. It moved like thought. "This is a pensieve," Dumbledore said. "It allows the extraction and examination of memories. But the magic of a pensieve is not limited to human memory." He set it on the desk between them. "Soul magic, the magic of the Horcrux, which is what the fragment is, has a specific signature. If we can extract the fragment the way a pensieve extracts a memory, cleanly, without contamination, without risk of dispersal, can you do that?" Harry said. "I cannot," Dumbledore said. "Not alone." He looked at Harry. "But I believe you can. The seventh defense describes it accurately, your undivided nature is the mechanism. You are not removing the fragment through force. You are simply, being fully yourself, completely and without reservation, in the presence of it. A divided thing cannot survive genuine wholeness. But it needs a conduit. Something to receive it as it leaves." "The pensieve," Harry said. "Modified," Dumbledore said. "Significantly and carefully modified over several months in anticipation of this conversation." Harry looked at the basin. At the liquid that moved like thought. "When you are ready," Dumbledore said. "Define ready," Harry said. "When you feel, when your sense of yourself is as complete and unguarded as it can be. When there is nothing suppressed, nothing in conflict, nothing you are managing or containing." He paused. "The binding's full dissolution is a precondition." And I believe, he looked at Harry with something frank in his eyes, I believe it dissolved completely on the night of the sorting. Harry thought about the room with the furniture in the right place. The pressure that had been there his entire life, gone. The clean sensation of simply being himself without the effort of being himself against something. It did, he said. Then the precondition is met, Dumbledore said. Harry looked at the pensieve. At Dumbledore. At Fawkes, who was watching all of this from his perch with round golden eyes that had seen, Harry suspected, rather more of this story than anyone else in the room. Now, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. You're certain? I'm not afraid of it, Harry said. I was never afraid of it. I just didn't know what it was. He paused. Now I know what it is and I know what to do about it, and the only reason to wait is if waiting serves a purpose. Does waiting serve a purpose? A long moment. No, Dumbledore said. Then now, Harry said. What happened next was not dramatic in the way Harry might have expected. Dumbledore positioned the pensieve on the desk between them. He performed 3 careful, precise modifications to it, wand work so controlled and specific that Harry watched it with genuine admiration, because Dumbledore's magic at its technical best was extraordinary, whatever Harry thought about his management instincts. You don't need to do anything, Dumbledore said. Except be present. Completely present. Whatever the fragment does, whatever discomfort you feel, you simply need to remain yourself. Wholly yourself. No management, no suppression, no performance. He looked at Harry. I suspect that is not difficult for you. Less difficult than it used to be, Harry said. Dumbledore placed both hands on either side of the pensieve. Harry sat in the chair opposite it and breathed, and let himself settle into himself the way he'd been learning to do, the way the chamber had been teaching him, and Hufflepuff's book, and the mornings with his hand on cold stone, and all the conversations that had been, at bottom, conversations about the same thing, be what you are, all the way down, without apology and without concealment. He felt the scar. Not pain. Presence. The fragment in it had been background noise his entire life, ambient, so constant he'd stopped registering it as separate from himself, and then the hat had named it and the charm had identified it, and now he knew it precisely, the foreign quality of it, the wrong temperature of it, a thing that had been placed in the wrong soil and had never been able to put down proper roots. He felt it become aware of what was happening. Not thought. Not will. A fragment of a divided soul wasn't capable of thought in the way whole things thought. But it had something, reactivity, self-preservation instinct, the automated resistance of a thing that does not want to end. He felt it press back against the dissolution the way resistance presses against inevitability, urgent and purposeless. Harry sat with it. He didn't fight it. There was nothing to fight, fighting was a division of attention, a split between self and other, and that was exactly what this required him not to do. He sat in himself completely, the way Helga Hufflepuff had described wholeness in her book, not the absence of difficulty but the presence of self within difficulty, the thing that remains when all the management falls away. He thought, I am Harry James Potter. I am the son of James and Lily. I carry Gryffindor and Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff and Slytherin in my blood, and I am none of them and all of them and myself above all. I have been contained and managed and reduced and protected, and I have survived all of it not because I was protected but because I was always exactly this, underneath everything they put over it. He thought, you were never mine and I was never yours, and it is time to end the confusion. The fragment left. It was not violent. It was not painful. It was, the best description Harry would find later, trying to explain it to Hermione, was like a splinter working its way free of skin that has been growing around it for too long. The body's natural motion, finally unobstructed. Something that should have happened years ago, happening now. The pensieve flashed. A cold blue-white light, contained entirely within the basin, and then settled, and the liquid that moved like thought moved differently, denser, something new in it, something that moved with the particular sluggish wrongness of a thing that was never meant to exist and now existed in a vessel designed to hold it safely until it could be properly dealt with. Harry sat for a moment in the silence. His scar was just a scar. He pressed his fingers against it. Smooth, raised skin. 10 years of living with something in it and now just, absence. Clean absence, the kind that comes after removal rather than loss. He took stock of himself the way he always took stock, methodically, from the inside out, and found everything present and nothing contaminated and the whole of himself precisely as it had been, minus the thing that had never been part of the whole. He looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore was looking at him with the pensieve in his hands and his face was doing something Harry had no word for. It was every complicated emotion the man had been carrying for 10 years arriving at once, without anywhere specific to land, just present, just his, just real. He looked very old and very relieved and very sad all simultaneously, and he looked at Harry with eyes that were doing nothing except seeing him, for once, without any of the management. "Are you all right?" Dumbledore said, and it was the most genuine version of that question Harry had heard him ask. "Yes," Harry said. "Better than all right." "The fragment is contained," Dumbledore said. "I will," he looked at the pensieve. "I know how to deal with this. It will not," a pause. "He will not be able to use it as an anchor from here." Harry nodded. He stood. He felt the solidity of his own feet on the stone floor and the stone acknowledging his weight, the old magic steady and quiet and present below everything. "Albus," he said. Dumbledore looked at him. "Thank you," Harry said. "For the pensieve. For the 10 years of trying to protect something you weren't sure how to protect. For caring about the outcome even when your methods were wrong." He paused. "Some of what you did was wrong. But the caring was real and I recognize it." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then, "You are the most extraordinary person I have met in a very long time," he said. "Possibly ever. And I have met a great many people." "The hat was right about me," Harry said. "The hat," Dumbledore said, with something that was almost amusement and was more than almost, "is always right." Fawkes sang. The full song, this time, beginning to end, clear and golden and completely itself, the kind of sound that has no other purpose than being exactly what it is. He went back to Gryffindor Tower while the castle was still dark and still quiet and sat in the armchair by the dead fire. He didn't relight it. He sat in the dark and breathed and let the silence be silence, which was something he'd always been able to do and valued more now than he had words for. He was not the same person who had gotten off a train 2 months ago. That was true and also not true. He was exactly the same person, the same habits, the same observations, the same instinct for watching a room and reading its people, the same capacity for patience and the same underlying warmth that he'd inherited from parents he'd never known and maintained despite a decade of people trying to tell him it was a weakness. He was the same person. The difference was the absence of the cage around him, the absence of the binding and the fragment and the accumulated weight of other people's designs on who he was supposed to be. He thought about the 5 alcoves in the chamber. About the 4 books and their 4 truths and the cipher that had required 4 people who were genuinely themselves to unlock. About Hannah Abbott who had walked toward the Hufflepuff alcove like following a sound she could already hear, and Luna who had been reading Rowena's logic frameworks with the devoted intensity of someone finally finding a language they'd always spoken without knowing its name, and Malfoy who had stood before the Slytherin alcove with something private and large and necessary happening in his expression, and Hermione who had read the Gryffindor book with both the quill moving and her face moving, the double processing of someone who understands through analysis and feels through understanding simultaneously. He thought about the blank 5th alcove wall. He got up and went to his trunk. He found his quill and a fresh roll of parchment. He came back to the armchair and he wrote, in the dark, by the light that came through the common room windows from the torchlit corridors outside, and what he wrote was not a formal document or a theoretical framework. It was a story. The story of the night the hat screamed, and the morning after, and the chamber below the dungeons, and everything that had moved toward everything else in the 2 months since, and what it had meant, and what it had produced. He wrote for an hour without stopping, which was a physical record for him. Then he stopped and read what he'd written and thought, this is the beginning of the 5th book. He folded it carefully. He would take it to the chamber when it was light. He would set it in the 5th alcove, against the blank wall, and let the castle know that its 5th book had its first page. The portrait hole opened behind him. He turned. Hermione came through it in her school robes already on, her hair doing its ambitious early morning thing, carrying her 3 books and her quill with the purposeful energy of someone who had woken up with intentions. She stopped when she saw him. Looked at his face in the dim light coming through the windows. She was very good at reading faces, she'd been getting better at it since September, or maybe she'd always been good at it and had been practicing not showing it. Something in his face told her something. "The scar," she said. "Gone," Harry said. "It's done." She stood very still in the middle of the common room. The books were clutched to her chest. Her expression went through several things rapidly and settled into something that was relief so complete it had no performance in it at all. "You're all right," she said. "Completely," he said. "The fragment, contained and dealt with. Dumbledore has it. It won't anchor anything." He paused. "It's over. That particular problem is over." Hermione Granger, who had spent 2 months taking notes on charms and compiling legal frameworks and researching cipher systems and building genealogy maps and reading books that weren't assigned to her and cross-referencing everything against everything else with the focused energy of someone who understands that knowledge is the most useful form of caring. Hermione Granger sat down on the floor of the Gryffindor common room and covered her face with both hands for a moment and breathed. Harry sat beside her on the floor. They sat there for a while without saying anything, which was something they'd gotten comfortable with, the silence between people who don't need to fill it. "I wrote the first page," Harry said eventually. "Of the 5th book." She took her hands away from her face. Her eyes were perfectly clear. "Show me," she said. He showed her. She read it, the whole of it, her eyes moving with their reading speed, quick and thorough, and when she finished she held the parchment for a moment and then looked at him. "It's honest," she said. "Yes," he said. "The founders built the chamber for someone who could be completely honest," she said. "Not clever or powerful. Honest. Those things aren't separate," Harry said. "That's what the cipher showed. You can't be fully powerful without being honest about what you are. The power requires the honesty. The wholeness requires the truth about all the parts." Hermione looked at the parchment again. At his handwriting, which was cleaner than she'd expected, deliberate and slightly angular. "There's more to write," she said. "A lot more," he agreed. "The fragment is gone but the things that put it there are still, yes," he said. "And the compact has only been formally invoked once, and the cipher's 7 defenses, yes," he said. "And Malfoy," she said, with the careful precision of someone placing something important, "is not finished changing." "No," Harry said. "He's barely started." "And the Ministry's 17 individuals," she said. "Still there," he said. "And you're 11, she said, and this time there was the barest smile at the corner of her mouth, barely visible, the internal version of a smile more than the expressed one. "I'm 11, he said. They sat on the floor of the common room as the dark outside the windows began to shift toward gray, the specific gray of November early morning, and the portraits on the walls stirred and a distant clock somewhere in the castle struck 6 and the building around them breathed with the slow, steady rhythm of something alive and old and fully awake. Ron came down the stairs at 6:15, hair in its usual structural marvel, wearing one slipper and carrying the other, and stopped when he saw them both on the floor. "Are you?" he started. "Fine," Harry said. "Better than fine," Hermione said. Ron looked between them for a moment, reading the room the way he read chessboards, not from the individual pieces but from the whole arrangement, the gestalt of it. Then something settled in his face. "Good," he said, with the complete and uncomplicated certainty of someone who needed exactly that amount of information. He sat on the floor beside them and put on his other slipper. "Is there food?" "Not yet," Harry said. "There will be in an hour," Ron said, and stretched his legs out and leaned back on his hands with the easy occupation of a person who is entirely content to wait for good things. They went down to the chamber after breakfast. All five of them, Harry and Hermione and Ron, who had been briefed on the walk down, and Luna who had already known somehow, and Malfoy who arrived at the chamber entrance already standing straighter in a way that had nothing to do with posture and everything to do with the person inside the posture. Harry stood before the blank fifth alcove wall with the folded parchment. He pressed his hand flat against the stone, the way he'd done on the first morning, and felt the castle recognize him, the old familiar pulse, steady and warm and immense. He held the parchment against the wall. The stone moved. Not opening this time, absorbing. The parchment slid into the wall the way something slides into its exact, waiting slot, a clean fit, and when it was gone the stone where it had been was different. Still blank but differently blank, not waiting anymore. Occupied. The first alcove of five, finally holding its contribution to what the founders had built this room to receive. He stepped back. The alcove carved itself. Not quickly. Not with drama. Slowly, the way ice forms rather than shatters, the stone reshaping itself with a deep, interior sound like the castle clearing its throat, and what emerged from the reshaping over the course of a full minute was not a symbol like the other four, not the sword or the diadem or the cup or the locket. What emerged was simpler. An open hand, palm upward, empty. Not empty in the sense of lacking. Empty in the sense of ready. Harry looked at it. What does it mean? Ron said, quietly. All four houses held in one, Luna said. The receiving position. The position of something that can hold everything without being divided by it. Harry looked at the open hand in the stone. At the four other alcoves with their symbols. At the table with the four books, now five presences in the room even if the fifth book was just beginning, just a page, just the first honest sentence of a story that had a long way still to go. He turned and looked at the people in the room with him, Hermione who had arrived at Hogwarts with 14 questions and had expanded that to several hundred and would keep expanding it for as long as she was alive and intended to spend all of that life finding answers, Ron who thought 3 moves ahead on a chessboard and only pretended not to on everything else, Luna who had been waiting for Harry with the comfortable patience of someone who'd known he was coming, Malfoy who was standing in front of the Slytherin alcove and looking at the newly carved hand with an expression that was the most open thing Harry had seen on his face yet, and Hannah who was sitting in the Hufflepuff alcove with her eyes closed and a small smile that seemed to be about something she could hear that the rest of them couldn't, yet. He thought, these are the people the story began with. He thought, they're not the end of it. He thought, looking at the carved hand and the first page of the fifth book absorbed into the stone and the chamber that had been waiting 1,000 years for this exact morning, the hat was right. Not just about the house. Not just about the 4 bloodlines and the binding and the things the 52 charms had broadcast into a hall full of people who would spend years processing what they'd experienced that night. About all of it. About him. The hat had pressed against his mind in the dark of the sorting and found something that wasn't manageable and couldn't be reduced and wouldn't stay in any container someone else built for it, and it had done the only thing it could do with something like that. It had told the truth. At maximum volume. In front of everyone. And the truth, as it turned out, was a better beginning than any of the stories that had been told about him before. He stood in the center of the chamber with the old magic pulsing in the stone beneath his feet and the open hand carved above the fifth alcove and the people who had found their way here and the story that was barely started, and he thought, all right. Let's go.